I also
Right.
think it's, a major red flag that there are clearly problems going on. Kirk and McConkie, the silencing of survivors. The United Nations. I mean, the ownership of of KSL and Desert News, which are clearly covering up corruption from our political leaders and corruption in the church,
I'd become the mouthpiece for the church.
and the fact that we have become a culture where having conversations like this is not okay,
Yeah.
to me is one of the biggest red flags. The fact
Absolutely.
that how many members would be completely uncomfortable listening, let alone having these dialogue, because that's dangerous. To me, that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Sure.
That is it's a gospel of tyranny. Because, I mean, the whole Joseph Smith's whole thing is teach people good, correct principles, let them govern themselves. Agency, the prophet has a thing. You don't just go along with it. You pray, you think for yourself. And I think we've moved so far from that to just obedient serfs and sheep. And it's reflected in our politics. It's reflected in this state. And to me,
Well,
it's
what about
just
the
dangerous.
Constitution is inspired by God in the very First Amendment?
Right.
Yeah.
First Amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I would really just second what you said. Like, the biggest red flag that I have regarding the church right now is that people cannot have these conversations.
Yeah, that's not of God.
And it really manifested
Especially
itself.
when there's clear corruption.
Yeah. Well, and it really manifested during the pandemic, I think, is when it really burst open and people really saw it, because you had the church again using their moral authority to put their thumbs on a position. And all of a sudden, one group of people in the church felt moral superiority
Yes.
by doing what the prophet was telling them to do. And another group of people felt a little bit put upon by that, right?
And for thinking for themselves and saying, you know what, my soul says no on the jab. And here, the prophet saying it's a literal godsend and,
Yeah.
and everyone should take it. I mean, it's.
So I remember like I was in a great ward where we did have a lot of these conversations. And I remember being with a member of my bishopric after things sort of cleared out, and we were standing outside in front of the church, and he just looked at me and he said, "Justin, is it ever going to go back to how it was before?" And my answer to him was, "Not if we don't have the conversations."
Yeah.
And so like, I really think that for the health of the church, people need to churn the dirt a little bit, right? And you are gonna get a little bit dirty, right? But like, it's just like farming. If you don't get a little bit dirty, you're not gonna have a crop.
I mean, come
Right?
on. And it's just like, look, we believe the Book of Mormon is the Word of God, but I mean, talk about how many times did the church go through periods of corruption. You talk about the pride cycle,
Sure.
cleansing the inner vessel, but yet for some reason in this period of prosperity, the corporation turned into this $400 billion corporation, hiding money, doing crazy things with the tithing money that go completely against the principles of the church, funding the United Nations. I mean, and yet now, there's no corruption at all. We can't, there's the church, the pride cycle disappeared, like you said. So I think.
And to take it out of Utah, just what we're seeing right now in present day in culture and politics on a federal level, there are hate speech laws being passed under anti-Semitism, which even as a Jew who does not want to see any of the anti-Semitic stuff out there, you see that is laying the groundwork from putting the full kibosh on any type of speech, whether it be in the church or in any religious community.
Yeah.
And welcome back to We Are the People. This is your host, Jason Preston, and again with my beautiful bride, looking beautiful. How we doing?
Good.
We are good. We are, and as you can see in our nowadays we just call this our backup studio, right?
Yeah, the undisclosed.
The undisclosed, but I will tell you this: we are filming in the middle of or right before a massive snowstorm.
Not
out
in
east.
Utah, though.
Not in Utah, out east.
Utah's actually, I think, at 0.1 inches for the winter.
Yeah, so we had this scheduled to fly out here to film with Justin, and we're very excited to be with him. He's got a couple incredible shows, but there's this massive snowstorm, that everyone's afraid right now of the whole city getting shut down and power going out. So
Just a sign that
crossing.
Just a sign that probably the powers that be don't want us all getting together.
Yes. So hopefully this goes well. Hopefully we make it home. But
Otherwise, we live here now.
otherwise we might be here for a little while. So stay tuned. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys. We're so thankful for the support you've given to these incredible survivors and victims. Again, we've covered so much. We've always been focused on corruption in our backyard. Fighting where you can make a difference. I make very little difference in DC, but there's so much we can do in our own backyard amongst our own local politicians. And when we started finding out about the ritual abuse, about the sex abuse, about the problems, in our own backyard, how severe they were, how dark it has just become. There's nothing else that I don't know. It's captured our hearts.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? We read all of your comments, and we try to respond to a lot of them, but it's interesting to see how many people are not in Utah. So, and to see this reflecting in your own backyards, wherever you're watching from. So I've seen South Carolina, I've seen Europe,
UK,
yes, all over.
France,
So I mean, this isn't
Australia.
an issue that's isolated to Utah by any means. This is a global issue.
You bet.
And I think the more that we can shine a light on it and the more that gets picked up by mainstream, it's amazing to see all the coverage Sean Ryan has been doing and the clips that he's been doing on SRA and some of the things. There's a lot of crossover. So I just keep getting the word out and keep, doing what you can to speak to your neighbors about what's going on and sharing this content because it's making a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, baby. So today's show, I think, is important. It's hard because I never wanted to be in the lane of church. It's political. But when you start to go to the top of the corruption, at least again in our backyard, you cannot not see the church's hand controlling the media, the church's hand bringing the United Nations in, the church's hand involved in these things. And so at what point there's just no way to fight the corruption without eventually saying, hey, wait a minute, there is problems within my own church with where the funding's going and how they're funding these things. And when ultimately the bottom line, children being hurt and perpetrators being protected, I believe we just have a God-given responsibility to stand and call it out. We have probably your favorite guest we've ever had.
Sorry, Chelsea.
Chelsea, we love Chelsea. She's on the political side. He's more on this side of things. We're here with Justin, and today he is going to be going through a history of how did we get to this point in this state? Where did the corruption start? We get that question from a lot of you, and I'm going to tell you this right now. We've been through this presentation with Justin, and I'm a big believer in the freedom of speech. I have the highest respect for Justin. There's a reason we have him on our show so much. Is I truly believe he is one of these incredible warriors who was sent for such time as this. That being said, when we start getting into church history, anyone I've had one-on-one conversations say, Jason, where does corruption start? My answer is always, I'm not so focused on where it started. I'm focused more on that it's here now. We're going to be talking about some things that I quite frankly am not completely on the same page, I would say, as Justin, but I want him to share his perspective because who am I to say that I have truth figured out, right? I don't have a corner on truth. I'm just feeling my way and trying to follow my own light. So as we talk today, I just want to make sure you are aware that these opinions are Justin's, and I will say 90% I agree with wholeheartedly. Stuff I'm bringing in, I don't know. I don't know where I stand. I don't know, and I'm just very careful. Stuff I don't know, I don't want to claim to know. But I will tell you this. Justin is not going to share anything here today that he has not done the research on and the work on, and so for that purpose, I want him to have the floor to be able to share what he's learned, because I believe we will all learn something from it. So, anything else you want to add, beautiful, before we let him?
No, I just maybe reintroduce you, Justin, for anyone just getting to know you and chiming into our show now.
Sure. Yeah.
Just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so my name is Justin Riggs. I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for about 43, 44 years. Got involved in abuse research, and then unfortunately about 2 years ago or so, was excommunicated for apostasy. But even in the midst of that, I've continued to do this abuse research because it's just become probably one of the most important parts of my life. And, tonight what we're going to be talking about is this question that you brought up, Jason, which I get all the time, which is, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Because in the church, we're very used to hearing a certain version of history, right? Like they put out saints, right? And that's the version of history that we're used to getting, that correlated version that the leaders of what I call LDS Inc. have agreed upon is the history. And as I studied abuse, I kept finding very strange historical things that I just had no idea were reality inside of the church. And at this point, now that I've been doing it for several years, I think I have a fairly good narrative of sort of an alternative history that's true that I think that people ought to explore, right? And I really appreciate what you said, that I don't come here claiming to know the truth, right? What I will claim is that everything that I present here tonight is true, but different people can look at different sets of facts, different people can look at the same set of facts and come to different conclusions.
Right.
And I don't expect anybody to come to the same conclusions that I've come to. What I really hope to do here is to give people information so that they can make wise decisions about how they proceed in their life, right?
Yeah.
So particularly in this situation where you have 15 men that are out there claiming that you can trust them completely and sort of staking your salvation on it, right? So that being said, we're going to start all the way back in 1842. We're going to come all the way up through 2026, and we're going to try to do it in about an hour and 15 minutes or so.
Okay. All right.
We'll see if we can make it, right?
Let's rock and roll.
All right.
All right, let's get in our time machine.
Yeah, exactly. So I titled this, I like to title my presentations, and I titled this one, Let Zion in Her Beauty Rise. And that's, a hymn that the church sings. And this idea of Zion is something that has always been a part of the church. So I'm just going to quote Joseph Smith back from 1842 in the Times and Seasons. And Joseph says, "The building up of Zion is a cause that has interested the people of God in every age. It is a theme upon which prophets, priests, and kings have dwelt with peculiar delight. They have looked forward with joyful anticipation to the day in which we lived, and fired with heavenly and joyful anticipations they have sung, and wrote and prophesied of this our day. But they died without the sight. We are the favored people that God has made choice of to bring about the latter-day glory. It is left for us to see, participate in, and help to roll forward the latter-day glory." And the point I want to make here is simply this. This was a primary reason for the church being restored, according to the saints, right? The establishment of Zion was a primary cause. And so now we're almost 200 years after this, and I think it makes sense to take stock of how have we done so far in terms of establishing Zion, if that's what the Lord wanted Joseph and the saints to do, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, I will be presenting only one side of this argument. Everybody can go read Saints and get the sort of pro-church, we're establishing Zion. Tonight is hard conversations about things that maybe people don't know that have happened in Mormon history, okay?
Yeah, and the reason I value this, and I think it's an important conversation, is, again, we've, over the past year, now talked to over 100 survivors of horrific abuse. And, we have, on our end, we have a book of names of perpetrators that obviously we can't put out public yet because we need the evidence. We need the people to come forward on their own and share that. But one of the things we consistently are hearing is many of the church historians are tied up in it,
Sure.
And so all of a sudden I'm starting to realize, wait a minute, maybe there has been some funny business
Sure.
with the history we've been given.
I don't even think any believing, practicing Latter-day Saint who has spent any time studying church history at this point, I don't think anybody would argue that church historians have not made things up, have not fabricated history, have not hid history. The John Taylor revelation is a really good example on polygamy, is a very good example of that. And I love that the church is being more forward about that and doing better at publishing the things that they have and trying to be more honest about that. I think that's commendable, right? But truthfully, there's a lot of Mormon history that people just don't know. And I think tonight we're going to cover a lot of things that people just don't know.
Yeah, all right.
Right? So the first thing is, the story that we're told as members of the church is that Joseph Smith dies and Brigham Young and the saints have to leave Nauvoo. They have to flee the persecution, right? And I think that's partly true. And I think the church has also acknowledged slightly that Brigham Young and several of the church leaders they just been indicted. And so they had to flee to keep their freedom as well. But one of the things that people don't really understand, I don't think, is the role that the railroad played in terms of Mormon history, okay? And everybody knows that once they got to Utah, they built the Transcontinental Railroad through Ogden, right? But what they don't know is that that was actually in Brigham's mind from the moment that they left Nauvoo, okay? And so this little slide here that I have is, where was Brigham's heart centered, right? Was it on Zion or was it on the railroad? And I'm going to propose that potentially it was more on the railroad than it was on Zion. And here's why. So this is a quote from Brigham Young. He says, "I do not suppose that we traveled but one day from the Missouri River here, but what we looked for a track where the rails could be laid with success for a railroad through this territory to go to the Pacific." And this was in 1868 when Brigham Young said this. And he actually said it before. I think he said it in the 1850s. And he said similar things several times. So here's my point about this. If you're fleeing persecution so that you can establish Zion, in my mind, the last thing you're going to do is build a railroad that brings Babylon straight through the backyard of your new Zion, right? In addition to that, what we know is that very soon after the railroad was established, the United Order went away completely. And the United Order was the closest thing, I think, that the Mormons got to establishing something relating or like that looked like Zion, right? So to me, when you look at it sort of dispassionately, it appears to me that Brigham spent the rest of his life doing railroads. His sons did railroads. Like, it was a huge industry, and it brought them into circles of power that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to be a part of, right?
Could it be argued that a railroad was necessary for the church to grow?
Sure.
Commerce, yeah.
Or
Sure. I think that's the argument that a lot of church leaders made. So you'll find quotes where the church leaders were saying, we're going to build the railroad because it's going to take all the riffraff out of Salt Lake City and Ogden, right? Now, I think that's a little bit naive, right? I think if they had just looked at what the railroad was doing where it was already established, they would have seen that that's not what a railroad does, right? A railroad gives access to that group of people that maybe you don't want. But certainly that's an argument that could be made, that in order for Zion to flourish, you needed to be able to bring goods. You need to be able to send goods that you produced outside of your community. And so certainly I think that's a reasonable argument. Yeah, absolutely. In my opinion, Zion died very early on. And so for those who don't know and haven't had the chance to research this, we all know the story of the Golden Spike, right? And that's when they connect there's one railroad being built from the Pacific. There's one railroad being built across the plains. They connect in Ogden, Utah, and they drive what's called the Golden Spike in, right? And in my opinion, this is really the thing that killed Zion. Again, and that's just my opinion, right? So the person that did this was Leland Stanford, as in Stanford University. And when I talk about these circles of power that the church got access to, one of those circles of power was the Stanford family. In addition to that, the church really got in with Union Pacific Railroad. And I don't have it in this presentation, but for those who want to go look at it, what you'll find is that the church has had a long, long history with the Union Pacific Railroad, with members of the church and leaders of the church being on the board of directors of the Union Pacific, including Brigham Young, and including our current prophet, Dallin H. Oaks, who was on the board of directors for a little while. And so many, many Mormons who have been inside that circle of power. Now, that's important because if you know the history of Union Pacific, you know that that's the Bush family. You know that that's the Harriman family. And these are people who are financing world wars and financing both sides of world wars, right?
And also Bush family is very much Skull and Bones and secret society families too.
Absolutely, which we're going to talk about because
these guys.
that ends up affecting Utah as well in a very profound way. And we're going to get to that at the beginning of the 1900s, right? Another thing I want to point out that I don't think really many people know is that, I get called a conspiracy theorist a lot, and I don't mind that too much. But if you're going to call me a conspiracy theorist, I come by it honestly, because the leaders of the church are really sort of your original conspiracy theorists. And to prove that, I'm going to read something that comes from a general conference in 1886, April of 1886. This is an epistle that the first presidency of the church wrote and had read in general conference. So if you think about that, what you've really got here is something very similar to what was happening in New Testament times, right? You had these leaders of the church traveling around. They would write epistles. They would send the epistles. The epistles would be read. Those were considered the guiding, doctrines of the church. Maybe that's a little bit strong, the word doctrine, but sort of this is what the church is supposed to be paying attention to. So here's what they say. The scenes which we are now witnessing in this territory are the results of a deep-laid and carefully planned conspiracy, which has been in process of formation for years. Its originators knew the elements they had to deal with, and by cunning contrivance, they have effected a wonderful combination. Religious and irreligious, ministers in sacerdotal robes and atheistic scoffers, businessmen of integrity and blacklegs, temperance men and drunkards, Men of strict morality and pimps and harlots are crowded together on the platform they have constructed, and they find no inconvenience from each other's companionship. Okay? So the point here is that the very top of the church, right? The first presidency of the church sincerely believed that there were conspiracies to overthrow Mormonism and to take control of the state of Utah. Okay? And I think if we're going to acknowledge that historical fact, the next obvious question is, were the conspirators successful? Okay? Now, I take the position that based on the historical evidence, it looks like there's a good chance that the conspirators were successful. And other people can take the opposite, that the church was able to fight off the conspirators and that they weren't successful and the church has had control of the state, for the 150, 180 years that it's been a state, so on and so forth. But I personally take the position that based on the information in this presentation, it looks to me like the conspirators largely succeeded. Okay, and we're going to go through how that happened.
Okay.
I'd say conspiracy theories have been going on long since then, long
Sure.
before. I'd even say Noah was a conspiracy theorist.
Absolutely. And the Book of Mormon, talks about Jesus Christ most, but the second thing that it talks about most is Gadianton robbers and secret combinations and conspiracy to overthrow governments, right? So I don't think this is a topic that any Mormon should be uncomfortable discussing, right? It's part of our religion.
I mean, and Ezra Taft Benson said there's no such thing as conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact.
Right. And we're going to talk about Ezra Taft Benson a little bit here later on.
Yeah.
So the next thing that comes after the railroad works for a while, and then there's economic problems. And so much of Mormon history, especially up through the 1960s or so when N. Eldon Tanner is in the first presidency, has to do with economic trouble. The church just continually the church and its leaders get themselves in economic trouble repeatedly. And what I see is as they get themselves in economic trouble, they do what people in economic distress do. They turn to outside influences to try to rectify that situation.
Bail them out,
Yeah. And so in this situation, they go to West Coast capital, they go to East Coast capital, and specifically with the sugar company, they go to the Havermeyers. And a lot of people don't know about the Havermeyer family, but they're sort of the Rockefellers of sugar, right? Sort of that same group. They had a really strong monopoly on this industry. And so the church decides to get into the sugar business. The important thing about this to me is that there's a quote from Wilford Woodruff, and he says this: "Now the inspiration of the Lord to me is to build this factory," speaking of a sugar factory. "Every time I think of abandoning it, there is darkness, and every time I think of building it, there is light. We will build the factory if it bursts the church." So again, I think that the logical question becomes, did it burst the church?
And what year was this that they started building the sugar factory?
Let's see, around 1890, I think, is when. And I may be off a little bit on my years, so people need to.
And Woodruff was a prophet of the church.
That's correct. Yeah, he was the prophet of the church at the time. And so, but they needed this. Right before they do the sugar, you can find in George Q. Cannon's diaries him talking about the leaders of the church are in so much debt that they don't think they're ever going to get out. And they're lamenting this fact. And so they're trying to figure out ways. And Heber J. Grant and George Q. Cannon are sort of the guys that get tagged as the men who are going to solve this problem. And they're the ones going east and west, begging for money. And the way that I view it is that these capitalists saw a great opportunity to invest in Mormonism as a business, not as a religion, but Mormons had a great reputation as very industrious people who listened to authority and were capable of achieving great things. And so from the way that I read history, I see that they see this as a great business opportunity.
Would you say this is the origin of the church as a corporation?
So I personally think that comes a little bit earlier than this. But the incorporation of the church, I actually should have talked about that in this presentation. The incorporation of the church goes through several iterations. And I wouldn't consider this like the modern iteration of the incorporation of the church. But certainly, once Joseph dies and they realize that there are property issues that happen when the leader of the church dies, and they couldn't get anything from Emma, right? There was big conflicts between Emma and Brigham about who was going to get what and when and where and how that was going to work. They began that process of incorporation early on, right? And so by the time they get to the sugar company, they're definitely running it through the church. And one of the things that's a little bit troubling for a person like me is that they're not only running it through the church, but they're using their moral authority to convince people to invest in their businesses. So you'll often find church leaders at this period of history saying, I'm going to get this backwards, or I may get it wrong a little bit, but this is the idea. They'll get up in a church meeting and say, well, you may be a Latter-day Saint, but you're no Mormon if you don't invest in this sugar company, right? And they're using their moral authority to pressure people to invest in this. In addition to that, you have situations with the railroad where Brigham Young convinces Mormons to do the work, but they never get paid, right? And so unfortunately, I think a lot of people want Mormon history to be different than other human history. We grow up being told sort of these magical stories about heavenly visitations and miracles that take place. And then we develop this desire for Mormons to stand outside of normal human history. But what I'm here to say is that when you take a good look at Mormon history is no different than any other large group of people. There's a lot of pride involved. There's avarice, there's greed, right? There's trial, there's struggle. There is persecution. Certainly in Mormon history, there's tons of persecution. But at least in my experience and from my studies, I don't find that Mormon leadership is any different than any other group of leadership that I would look at in terms of the history, right? These are people just trying to make it work, trying to get through life, trying to support their families, trying to leave generational wealth for the people behind them. Like all the things that you see in any other group of people you're going to see inside of Mormonism, right? So again, I sort of take this position that by doing this, Wilford Woodruff very well may have burst the church. It's certainly a point where you can look and say, what were the effects? What was the fruit of starting the sugar company and going with that? And one of the fruits was they started engaging in illegal activities. So the FEC investigated the church later on down the line and found that they were engaging in monopolistic practices. The church got in trouble for that. And this is sort of one of those places where you see that there's a desire to serve God and mammon, and sometimes serving mammon wins out over serving God inside of church leadership, in my opinion, right? All right. The next piece here is really important, and I think it's something that hardly anybody knows. And so I'm sort of excited to talk about it because this is sort of a larger audience than I usually get to talk to. But you're going to see it throughout the rest of this presentation. And what it has to do is with Rotary International, okay? So the early 1900s are a critical period for the church and for the state of Utah because they had just become a state. They're beginning to develop and mature. And one of the things that you'll see is that several organizations sort of slide into the state right around this 1910, 1911 period.
This is well beyond them being a theocracy, though. We're a true statehood now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And so in order to get statehood, they had to give up some things. Everything's a trade-off, right? In this case, the biggest thing that they gave up was polygamy, and that caused some problems inside the church, right? There was a large group that didn't want to give it up, but there was a large group that did. But in the end, they ended up giving up that so that they could become a state, right? So anyway, back to Rotary International. So everybody, I think, has an idea of what Rotary International is. But what people don't really understand is that Rotary International was really the foundation for the United Nations.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and I'm going to show that with a couple statistics here in just a second. But what's important to understand is that Utah was a very early adopter of Rotary International. And then beyond that, I have an entire 2-hour presentation showing how every church leader, like from 1911 moving forward, was a part of Rotary. So this was not this was not something that a few people were doing. You can think about it like Boy Scouts, right? Like Boy Scouts, once Boy Scouts was a part of the church, like every young man was doing Boy Scouts. For the older men, especially in Salt Lake and in the Utah area, all of them were doing Rotary International. It became a part of the fabric of the church that I don't think many people understand, to the point where I'm going to show you a quote from a prophet where he literally says that the aims of Rotary are in line with the aims of the church, which I think is debatable, right?
Now, when you say Rotary International, this is the omnipresent Rotary Club that you see popping up in every state.
You got it. So just like Freemason lodges are in every little city and all across America and in the world, Rotary International is very similar. Now, the difference is that Rotary International claims that they're not a religious organization. It's supposed to be a civic organization where businessmen can come together and men of different religions can come together, and they sort of rotate power, right? And the reason it got the name Rotary is they were rotating where they were holding the meetings. Okay.
And our listeners, it's kind of ship is a mixed bag on understanding the political stuff, or at least our perspective. And I would highly recommend, if you're not familiar with why I have major concerns and we have major concerns in the United Nations, we've done a show, we've done a few shows on the United Nations and the satanic origins of it that I believe are undebatable.
Yeah, we could put a link with the one that we did with Carolina Allen just this last year.
Yeah, we'll pop it up here on the screen, the show, the thumbnails, and then we'll put a link below. And I would highly recommend, if you're not familiar with the United Nations, it's very important because, again, that is the organization that is rolling out, and from what we see, all of these dark satanic agendas,
the Sustainable Development Goals,
and Utah is in the middle and funding, and we'll probably get into that, funding much of that, which is why I had red flags, which is what led me to, well, wait a minute, why is the church funding all this? So we'll put links to that, but again, it's. Be familiar with the United Nations. You need to understand why we have such major concerns, and things like Rotary. The reason to me I see those concerns is it's the same thing with the Masonic lodges. That's how you get these lodges everywhere. You get these Rotary, and now all of a sudden you have direction from the top, the United Nations, and you have the Rotary groups all over to implement it. And when you look at how Utah's in bed, this is probably how it happened. So I'll let you go.
And let me interject just one thing really quickly. Let me chase a rabbit, because we skipped over this part, but you talk about Masonic lodges, and I hear and see a lot of comments, people saying, oh, the LDS church is, an evil Masonic organization. Well, Masonic organizations and the Masons weren't necessarily bad. It was really in the infiltration in the mid-1800s with Albert Pike, where it did become more of a satanic organization. So it's not necessarily like the broad strokes of all these things are bad. It's the infiltration of these groups where they then become derailed. Because we even know people that are a part of Rotary clubs that are good people.
Absolutely. So, and I think that's really important because we're going to talk about Rotary. We're talking a little bit about Freemasonry. Next, I'm going to talk about fraternal organizations at the University of Utah. And
did we hit everything on Rotary? I don't want to interrupt.
Well, we're going to talk more about it as we go throughout. So I think we're okay for right now as an introduction. But the point I want to make is that when we talk about these organizations, and you guys use the word satanic, there's a couple things. First of all, what you say is so true. By and large, these organizations are made out of good people who are doing good things in their community. Rotary International, on one level, really is a service organization, as are fraternities, as is Freemasonry. Where you have problems is as you climb up that ladder, right? And we're not going to get into that tonight, but I just want to make that point that I get it all the time. Like, my grandpa was in this fraternity. Like, my grandpa was a Freemason. Yes. I know and I understand. And the vast majority of people are there for the service and there for the networking and there for the camaraderie, right? So by no stretch of the imagination do I want to leave people with the impression that I think that everybody who joins a fraternity, joins Freemasonry, or joins Rotary International is evil and satanic. Sure. The other point that I want to make about this is when you use the word satanic, here's how I distinguish this in my own mind. There are, I'm very binary, I'm very black and white. And in my mind, I look at it this way. There are organizations who encourage the free agency of man, and there are organizations that try to take away that free agency. And all I'm saying is that you get as you get higher up in these organizations like fraternities, Rotary International, and the United Nations, what you find is people who are less and less inclined to give people their agency to make their own decisions, and people who are more inclined to govern things from the top and take away the agency of man, which I consider satanic because of my Mormon upbringing.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Right? So for me, that's when we say satanic, that's what I really mean, is taking away the agency of man, okay? So as I mentioned, in 1911, this was a big year. And in addition to Rotary, what you'll find is that this is the year that Skull and Bones gets introduced at the University of Utah, okay?
Sigma Chi.
So slightly before that, you have other fraternities like Sigma Chi, Amici Fideissimi, Pi Kappa Alpha, so on and so forth. But 1911 is the year that the first class of Skull and Bones gets put in. Now, this graph is, we mapped out every member of Skull and Bones from 1911 to 1970, which is when they stopped publishing the names and pictures of Skull and Bones members in the Utonian, which is the University of Utah's yearbook. And I was just shocked by the results of this. I had no idea that this was what was going to happen. But when we mapped it out, what we found is that there was a very clear power sharing agreement between Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha in terms of how many people were going to get in Skull and Bones. Because what we found is that over a period of 60 years, when you get to the end of that 60 years, Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha have almost exactly the same number of Skull and Bones members, right? Now, for my profession, I work in analytics, and that is a finding, right? Like that's something that's going to catch your attention, right? And so for me, it shows very clearly that there was this power sharing agreement between these two fraternities. And the reason I think that's really critical is that it gives you what I would consider deep insight into these secret societies in general, right? I think you can do what's called generalize this finding, in my opinion. And I think what you see out there, like there are a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists who think there's like one agenda and there's a pyramid and there's somebody on top and everybody else is underneath. My perception of this is really that what you have is a large number of secret societies and groups of people who have their own agendas, and they're willing to enter into power sharing agreements when it's pragmatic, right? When it makes sense for them. But then you'll see those ties break when it's pragmatic to go with somebody else, right? And it's really just sort of power politics is what I would call it. And so in this case, you have these two fraternities that are willing to power share. I think by and large, you could apply this across any secret society, and there are so many of them.
Well,
right?
and it goes back to like the Knights of Templar and
Yes.
the Jesuits
Yes.
and all of those of ancient times of old.
Yes. So again, I think that what you see throughout history is these groups coming together to achieve part of their agenda, right? And we're going to talk about this with the church and the CIA because there comes a time in the church's history where it makes sense for the church to partner with the Central Intelligence Agency. And so the point I want to make is like, as you're looking at this history, if you just keep that lens of these groups are looking for other groups of people who are willing to help them accomplish part of their agenda, with the knowledge that it's not going to be permanent, right? But they're just sort of floating in this pond, and as they come together, and then they drift apart from each other, and maybe they'll come back together 100 years from now again, right? Sort of a situation, okay? So just to corroborate the earlier conspiracy theory, the concerns of the first presidency, we have corroborative evidence regarding that in a book that John A. Widtsoe, who was an apostle of the church, wrote. So John A. Widtsoe, before he was an apostle, was the president of the University of Utah. And sometime around 1915, he doesn't say exactly when this happened in his book, but sometime during that period, John A. Widtsoe writes about an experience that he had when he was president of the University of Utah, where he overheard two members of the Board of Regents talking about how they needed to overthrow Mormonism by teaching kids away at the University of Utah from the precepts of Mormonism. Once they were going to do that, they were going to get a non-member university president. Then they were going to take over the state of Utah. And John A. Widtsoe just kind of reflects on that and says something along the lines of they had forgotten their oath to the institution temporarily, sort of a situation. My point is simply this. If the first presidency was concerned, John Widtsoe offers a second witness that there was a problem, right? These were the only two non-member members of the Board of Regents. And they were clearly conspiring to overthrow the Mormon youth by teaching them away from the teachings of Mormonism. I think the main way that they did that was through the Greek living system.
Oh, and that's interesting when you think of present day BYU when they're ripping up the proclamation and all the other things they're doing at BYU.
Sure.
So
Teaching genderless Jesus.
Right.
So just to review the timeline here, so you have a few issues. You have the sugar. You have
the railroads.
The railroad is earlier, but you have the sugar. Can you just scroll back on the scroll? Let me look at that. There was Rotary International, and then the Skull and Bones. Was Wilfred Woodruff the prophet during all that, or who was leading the church at that time?
No, I don't know is the answer, but I'm pretty sure that by this point Wilfred Woodruff has passed
And what year are we talking about right now? 1915 or so?
Yeah, 1911-ish. Yeah, 1910,
like
1911.
there's a lot happened during that, and then you're going to get into. I'll let you keep going, but it just seems like seems like a significant time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's extremely significant. And one of the things that you have is you have George Albert Smith maturing during this time, right? And Heber J. Grant maturing during this time. And Heber J. Grant ends up being an extremely important figure that I don't have in the presentation. But Heber J. Grant is really important because when Brigham Young took control of the church, he was really just holding it in conservatorship for one of Joseph's relatives. That was sort of the belief, was that one of Joseph's heirs would mature and be able to take over the church. But Emma and Brigham just couldn't get along, and they began to see that that wasn't going to happen. So what ends up happening is Heber Kimball takes Heber J. Grant and puts him on a table, and he prophesies that Heber J. Grant is going to be the prophet of the church one day. Well, Heber J. Grant doesn't want to be the prophet. Heber J. Grant is very business-minded. He wants to be a banker, right? And so he grows up and he's telling his mom, hey, like, I don't want to be the prophet. In addition to that, Heber's mother isn't sealed to Jedediah Grant. Like, that doesn't happen until like 100 and something years later. There's all kinds of weirdness going on in terms of Mormon history at this point. But Heber does end up being a huge part of the sugar company. And then he becomes prophet. And you really see a shift away from the spiritual to the commercial with the Heber J. Grant presidency. I would also suggest that.
What year was that, roughly?
Oh gosh, you're gonna get me again.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We can put it on the screen.
Yeah.
Well, I will clarify to answer the question. It was Joseph F. Smith, who's actually the prophet of the church from 1901 to 1918.
Okay.
So
great.
it was potentially, Smith, but potentially an heir of the Smith family.
Yeah. So you're talking, that's going to be Hiram's side, I believe, right? Sort of a situation. And I don't know. I don't remember the family tree.
Yeah.
But basically, like, they really thought that one of Joseph's sons was going to come and take over leadership of the church at some point. And then it just became clear that that was not going to happen. But partially because of the polygamy issue. Right? Okay.
And then I'll just clarify, John Taylor was the prophet from 1880 to 1887. Wilford Woodruff was 1889 to 1898. Lorenzo Snow was 1898 to 1901. And then it was Joseph F. Smith. So
Okay.
we could put this up on the screen if people need to follow along.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm the fact checker for now.
That's great. Yeah, no, that's really good. So Rotary pops up again in 1935. So we skip ahead a couple decades. And Mariner S. Eccles, so Eccles should be a name for anybody who lives in Utah that you're going to recognize.
For more reasons than one.
Yep. And Mariner S. Eccles comes from a polygamous family, right? And he comes from the second wife. And by this time, Mariner is no longer a member, but he wrote a very fascinating book, which the name of it slips my mind right now. But he basically talks about how he sort of sees himself as a Joseph figure, right? And so his family sort of gets cast off, and he's out there wandering, but he ends up becoming an incredibly powerful person inside of Utah and then inside of the country, because he's part of what's called the Banking Act in 1935, which ends up setting up the modern Federal Reserve.
The Bretton Woods Agreement, right?
Okay, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So there was already a Federal Reserve, but this becomes the modern Federal Reserve. And what's interesting about Mariner S. Eccles' book is that what you see is this is where it shifts from production to consumption. So because they were in the Depression, Mariner S. Eccles and a large group of people were out thinking about how can we get ourselves out of the Great Depression. And Mariner S. Eccles comes to the conclusion that we can't produce our way out of the Great Depression, but we can consume our way out of the Great Depression. And so this consumer society that we live inside of in 2026 that's just metastasized really starts at the Great Depression and with people like Mariner S. Eccles, who sets up the Federal Reserve, which, I mean, there's been conversations since the beginning of this, whether or not that's really good for our country or not.
Well,
right?
and going back a little bit further, if you want to put on your tinfoil hat and talk conspiracies again, with the whole Titanic sinking in 1912,
Sure.
and then the Federal Reserve becoming a thing in, the following year in 1913.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think our audience probably knows the Federal Reserve was not good, and really the beginning of the end of this country. And here we have Eccles right in the and throws that. That's something again with Chelsea on our political stuff, and that's why there's so much intersection here. Why is it's like you see these very corrupt political people who helped destroy or laying the foundations for the destruction of this country. Right in our own backyard in Utah.
So, and it's really important to understand that the Eccles family really saved the church during some of these economic periods where the church was in trouble. So again, Heber J. Grant comes into this, and you'll find Heber J. Grant writing a letter to the Eccles family after the death of Mariner's father saying, in my last conversation with your father, he mentioned that he was going to give us X amount of dollars, right? And so, but you have to remember that even though Mariner wasn't a member, he was still a very prominent member of the community. He was a
he was
charter
not-
member.
Eccles was not a member of the church?
At this point, he had drifted away,
Okay.
from the church. And so, yeah, but the Eccles family, obviously hugely important and influential in all Mormon history, whether they're members of the church or whether they're not members of the church. Like all families, some go this way and some go that way, but they're all extremely influential.
And they got their money from banking mostly was...
No, so I don't know all of the things that they did, but I believe a lot of it was lumber and timber, yeah, and stuff like that. But yeah, no, the Eccles family had many business interests. Mariner himself was in the banking industry, yeah. So that's where he ended up, and there's some interesting stories about that. But if we hop ahead another decade, we see more Rotary International. And something that I think most members of the church don't recognize or know is that Russell M. Nelson's father was actually the president of the Salt Lake Rotary Club in 1944. So right around World War time, right? And so Marion Clavar Nelson is his father. Marion Clavar Nelson was the head of one of the two most prominent advertising agencies in Utah, and a very influential man, very good friends with David O. McKay. And so he was inactive in the church, as Russell M. Nelson often referred to, up until the very end of his life when they went through the temple. And that was a highlight of Russell M. Nelson's life, according to him. But Russell M. Nelson did not come out of nowhere, right? Russell M. Nelson came from a very prominent, very successful family in Salt Lake. And so in addition to his business success, Marion was also involved in many government committees and so on and so forth. A very, very influential member of the community.
And going back to the show we first did with you about the Nelson scandal, the Miles scandal,
Yeah.
wasn't it known that there was some SRA in that bloodline predating the Miles?
Well, yeah, I don't know that I would say that it was known. I mean, what we know is that generally speaking, when you come across ritual abuse, it's generally generational, right? And so I think there's a lot of concern for people when the Mileses got named as potential ritual abusers, that it was that kind of a thing, right?
The patterns.
There's patterns, right? And that kind of thing. So I would not say that there is any proof of that I am aware of.
I might be
in that
thinking
family.
of the Bowen family connection where there was known abuse from the
Yes,
father.
certainly known abuse with Gordon Bowen, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. So again, I want to show how I don't want to just state that Rotary sort of gave birth to the United Nations or was part of that birthing process. Let's talk about specifically how that worked, okay? So I'm just going to read through this. In 1942, a Rotary conference in London gathered ministers of education from 21 governments to discuss post-war educational exchanges, effectively laying the groundwork for the creation of UNESCO in 1946. At the 1945 UN Charter Conference in San Francisco, Rotary was one of 42 organizations invited to serve as consultants to the U.S. delegation. A total of 49 Rotarians served in 29 different national delegations, directly assisting in drafting the UN Charter. So a significant number of Rotary International members were there to draft the UN Charter, okay? So you could very easily say that the UN vision is Rotary's vision in large part, okay? 5 Rotarians have served as presidents of the UN General Assembly, okay? So that's a significant number of people that have done that.
And Rotary's only been around since the early 1900s at its inception, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So Utah was like the 8th chapter, something like that. I think it was only 8 years after the first chapter, which was in Chicago. Paul Harris, I believe, was the man who started up Rotary International.
Fact check true.
Fact checked true. Good. One thing that I want to point out, because we're going to talk about it a little bit, is one of the major projects that the UN and Rotary International have been involved in since their inception is vaccination, right? And we're going to get to the global pandemic that we just went through in 2020, and we're going to talk about why the church may have been so interested in vaccination.
Interesting.
And that kind of a thing. And so it goes back to this, that Rotary International, one of their service projects has been eradication of disease through vaccination, okay?
Is that tied to UNESCO at all? Because you mentioned that briefly.
Yeah, so I'm not like an expert in the UN and what these different acronyms mean. So I'm not going to go out on a limb and pretend that I know the answer to that.
Well, I could tell you UNESCO stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
Sure.
And that was founded in 1945, just after World War II.
Okay.
So around the same timelines as we're in right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, as we know, the UN is just this sprawling organization at this point, right? I mean, they touch just about everything you can imagine at this point. And I'll show you some of the people that that the church works with that also work with the United Nations. And it's sort of this network, right? And they all have similar, again, it's just pragmatic, right? One of the interesting things about this, though, is that there's really a schism inside the church about what the United Nations is and what it represents, right? And you got your Bentonites that are sort of, I think, along the same position that you took, Jason, that sort of satanic in origin and houses a lot of socialist and communist sympathizers. And then you have sort of this other group of people who, most people don't know who Beverly Brough Campbell is, but we're going to talk a little bit about her. But Beverly Brough Campbell ends up being a part of a church program like the International Office. And her main job is to be in Washington, D.C. and New York, working directly with the United Nations. So you've got sort of this internal dichotomy, and it's sort of like one of the things that I name is like a church at war with itself. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, headquarters 666 Rockefellers. I mean,
I know.
And again, this is where
room.
you got people have to go and do a little research. There's the satanic elements of it are just out of control.
And we've
But
had
another
people
show.
on the inside in past shows, even Lisa Logan would show photos of the art in there, the meditation room, which is
and
purely
that's that.
satanic.
But we've covered that in other shows. I don't want, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think this is an important conversation. One of the things that's so perplexing to me is why members of the church aren't having these conversations. You can clearly see that there's like, it's not, the split isn't as much as it was when Benson was in the Quorum of the 12 and Prophet, but you can still see that there's tension about this. You have certain members of the Quorum of the 12 who will wear the Sustainable Goals pin, right? You have Sharon Eubank going up to the United Nations. You have Ahmad Corbett up there for, like the church is now a trusted partner of the United Nations. Yeah. And so, but there's this
how
tension.
much funding of our tithing money goes to the United Nations.
Well, and Bednar, the 10 Commandments of
Hiking
climate change?
Yeah, Bednar hikes up to the top of Mount Sinai for the new 10 Commandments of climate change. I mean, it's these are the things that that was like forced me to look at the church. It's like because we understood the UN goals are aligned with what you cannot not see is the rollout of the mark of the beast, and you can it's everything they're doing is about taking away our independence as America and pushing into this global government.
Sure.
And it's like, why is the church in bed with these people? Why are the 12 meeting with them? Why is it the only place they meet outside New York is Utah? I mean, there's so many concerning things, and it goes to what I think you're showing here is how it all came together.
Yeah. So there's a really critical period of time in the 50s and 60s that this is where Ezra Taft Benson comes in, and David O. McKay is the prophet, and you're going to see David O. McKay really trying to walk a tightrope, okay? And on one side, he's got these people who are sort of Rotary International / United Nations, a little more liberal, right? Two of the members of his presidency are more liberal. And then you've got Ezra Taft Benson, who's about as far right as you can go with the John Birch Society and all that kind of thing, and his son, Reed Benson. And you're going to see David O. McKay put his thumb on the scales just slightly. And here's how that works. So Ezra Taft Benson wants to be a part of the John Birch Society. He wants to promote the John Birch Society. He is promoting the John Birch Society, but he's getting pulled in, and David O. McKay is basically telling him, look, we don't mind if you're like a part of this and if you want to, but like you can't make it seem like the church approves of the John Birch Society or the things that it's teaching. On the other side, David O. McKay explicitly endorses the Rotary International, and not only that, he lets an apostle go be the president of Rotary International. Okay, so that apostle was Richard L. Evans, and in 1956, there's an article in a newspaper, and this is David O. McKay. It says, 10 years ago today, Mr. Wallace said, Elder Evans was nominated a candidate for district governor of Rotary. At that time, President McKay said, the aims of Rotary, which are the aims of the United Nations, as we just established, okay, the aims of Rotary are compatible with those of the church. And it would please me to see Richard rise to the top of Rotary International, okay? So on one side, he's got a very conservative person who wants to be a part of an organization, and he kind of puts his thumb on it and says, nope, not going to do that. And then he gently tilts the other direction. And I think what you've seen since this period of time is a general leftward drift inside of church leadership.
Interesting.
Would be the way that I say that, okay? And it happens right around this 1950 period where David O. McKay is trying to navigate this very difficult situation, and he just barely tilts 1 degree. It's like an Elder Uchtdorf moment, right? You tilt 1 degree, and you go 60 years, and now all of a sudden you're in a totally different place, right?
You know, and I think this is an appropriate place to talk about, you know, I think there's this idea in the church that I've been guilty of, thinking that, you know, these 12 men are all perfect. They've all, you know, in my mind, I believe they were all seen and walked and talked to Christ. That was my understanding, my belief. And I just think and I've come to think, wait a minute, you know, Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God, Savior of the world, picked, you know, 12 apostles, one of whom was Judas, who ended up being a very wicked man, betraying the Savior for a piece of silver.
Sure.
Joseph Smith, who we claim, you know, is a prophet of God, and I believe is a prophet of God, picked how many apostles, and how many of them apostatized.
Right.
And then, wait a minute, and then Joseph Smith became the prophet, and since then, none have?
Sure.
We've had this 12 perfect men. I
So-
don't know. And so now I started to think, well, maybe you know, maybe there is an idea that these men can be, that we're dealing with humans.
Yeah.
That have always been corruptible.
So again, I mean, if you
But
go
that
back,
goes against the whole culture of the church, and that's why I have these concerns.
certainly the modern culture of the church.
Modern. well
Okay.
said.
And when does that happen? It's around this same time. Like at some point, okay, so this is going to be a little bit part of that hard conversation. And it's not like what I would consider like based on historical evidence, but like let's just take the conversation a little bit further. Around this time, like if you're thinking about groups that want to make everything appear okay when everything's not okay, who are you talking about? You're talking about conspirators who are in secret societies, who infiltrate organizations, but they don't want anybody to know. You're talking about wolves in sheep's clothing, right? And so there is this weird thing inside of the church where all of a sudden you're no longer talking about secret societies. You're no longer talking about Gadianton robbers. You're no longer talking about apostasy. And it's sort of just a weird thing. The Book of Mormon teaches us that there's cycles, right? Like one of the major things that they talk about is the pride cycle. The church members of today have to argue that for at least the last 60 years or so, there's been no pride cycle that's taken place.
Right.
And somehow magically it's kumbaya. Everybody's getting along with each other.
Church's $400 billion organization.
Sure. But then as we're going to see, that might be great at that everybody's getting along and you don't see the public fights, but certainly privately there are fights going on, including the fight. It's Hubie Brown and Ezra Taft Benson. And when you get into that history, we really owe a lot to Greg Prince, who wrote The Rise of Modern Mormonism. And there's another gentleman whose name slips my mind, but he's out of Colorado, who's been writing some really great books that are actual history of the Brethren. And there are major differences and there are major controversies to the point where apostles are utilizing the papers in Salt Lake to ghostwrite articles or opinion pieces, basically speaking ill of their brethren, right? Sort of a situation. And so they can pretend all they want that they all see things the same and that they're all on the same page. In reality, it's 15 men. And when you get 15 men together, there are going to be some difficult conversations. There's going to be some difficult history. It just is what it is.
I also think it's, a major red flag that there are clearly problems going on. Kirk and McConkie, the silencing of survivors, there's the United Nations. I mean, the ownership of of KSL and Desert News, which are clearly covering up corruption from our political leaders and corruption in the church.
I'd become the mouthpiece for the church.
And the fact that we have become a culture where having conversations like this is not okay, to me is one of the biggest red flags.
Absolutely.
The fact that how many members would be completely uncomfortable listening, let alone having these dialogue, because that's dangerous. To me, that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Sure.
That's a gospel of tyranny. Because, I mean, the whole Joseph Smith's whole thing is teach people good, correct principles, let them govern themselves. Agency, the prophet has a thing. You don't just go along with it. You pray. You think for yourself. And I think we've moved so far from that to just obedient serfs and sheep, and it's reflected in our politics. It's reflected in this state, and it's, to me,
Well,
it's
what about
just
the
dangerous.
Constitution is inspired by God in the very First Amendment?
Right.
Yeah.
First Amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I would really just second what you said. Like, the biggest red flag that I have regarding the church right now is that people cannot have these conversations.
Yeah, that's not of God.
And it really manifested
Especially
itself.
when there's clear corruption.
Yeah. Well, and it really manifested during the pandemic, I think, is when it really burst open and people really saw it, because you had the church again using their moral authority to put their thumbs on a position. And all of a sudden, one group of people in the church felt moral superiority
Yes.
by doing what the prophet was telling them to do. And another group of people felt a little bit put upon by that, right?
And for thinking for themselves and saying, you know what, my soul says no on the jab. And here, you know, the prophet saying it's a literal godsend, and
Yeah.
and everyone should take it. I mean, it's
So I remember like I was in a great ward where we did have a lot of these conversations. And I remember being with a member of my bishopric after things sort of cleared out, and we were standing outside in front of the church, and he just looked at me and he said, "Justin, is it ever going to go back to how it was before?" And my answer to him was, "Not if we don't have the conversations."
Yeah.
And so like I really think that for the health of the church, people need to churn the dirt a little bit, right? And you are gonna get a little bit dirty, right? But like, it's just like farming. If you don't get a little bit dirty, you're not gonna have a crop.
I mean, come
Right?
on. And it's just like, look, we believe the Book of Mormon is the Word of God, but I mean, talk about how many times did the church go through periods of corruption? You talk about the pride cycle,
Sure.
cleansing the inner vessel, but yet for some reason in this period of prosperity, the corporation turned into this $400 billion corporation, hiding money, doing crazy things with the tithing money that go completely against the principles of the church, funding the United Nations. I mean, and yet now, you know, there's no corruption at all. We can't, you know, there's the church, the pride cycle disappeared, like you said. So I think,
And to take it out of Utah, just what we're seeing right now in present day in culture and politics on a federal level, there are hate speech laws being passed under anti-Semitism, which even as a Jew who does not want to see any of the anti-Semitic stuff out there, you see that is laying the groundwork from putting the full kibosh on any type of speech, whether it be in the church or in any religious community.
Yeah. And I would just say that like the stifling of speech inside the church starts with whenever somebody says, "Follow the prophet." That's when the stifling of speech begins. It's just become this sort of third rail that you can use that as a trump card anytime you want to.
Let's address that if we have time and if you have the information. Because people, that was a big thing for me. Oh, follow the prophet. God will never let the prophet lead the church astray.
Mm-hmm.
Can we address that?
Yeah, so that was Wilford Woodruff as well. And so that comes from him.
Doesn't come from the scriptures.
I would say that the scriptures are fairly clear that prophets can make mistakes, that prophets can sometimes lead people astray, and that it's important that we each have our individual relationship with Christ. I think, on the other hand, the scriptures are extremely clear that we ought to take the words of the prophet more seriously than we take the words of any other mortal being, right? And to this day, even though I'm an excommunicated member of the church, I still watch conference, and I take what they say extremely seriously. Much of what they said is what led me down this path of researching abuse, because you look at what they say. I often say in my presentations that anybody can say anything, but actions reveal intent. I would suggest to people that the words of the prophets are still, by and large, exactly what the world needs to be hearing. My concern is sometimes that the actions of the prophets don't follow the words of the prophets.
I agree with that, but I would also say the church has done a very good job creating a culture of focusing on principles of just being tolerant and nice and belonging and all the UN things of open-minded and loving to everybody. And we've created a nation, a state of cupcake Christians who are sitting on the sidelines of good and evil instead of leading the charge while Satan is clearly raging right now.
Sure.
And the other thing is too, is the fact of the matter is, and it's stuff's coming out with, again, and this is why it's important in our audience. I appreciate our audience because they've been being prepared for this through survivors. Is the fact of the matter is, we have the LDS Church of Satan has infiltrated the church. We talked about it in the Glenn Pace memo at the highest levels. So again, it's, you know, we're jumping between 101 and like 202 here, but 101 is, can there be corruption? And are these men all perfect? And can we even have conversations about corruption? To the other end of the spectrum, which is where I have come to see it, which is there is actually evil. not just corruption, literal evil that has taken hold of the reins of the church.
Sure. I think that, I mean, the pendulum of history never stops swinging. And I think the key is not to overreact when the pendulum is on the side that you're not on.
Well, because it swings the
Right.
opposite way.
And don't pull it back too hard.
Yeah.
You can think about it like a steering wheel. Like if you hit a patch of ice and the steering wheel goes one direction, the worst thing you can do is pull it the opposite direction as hard as you can.
Yeah.
And I think as members of the church, or just as human beings, there's a tendency when the pendulum is swinging away from what you believe to be true, you want to grab it and pull it back as hard as you can, but you just do more damage. And sometimes I think just letting the pendulum of history swing is okay.
Yeah, and you see that on the political spectrum. You know, what a couple of decades ago would have been classical liberal
Absolutely.
would be conservative now.
Absolutely. Yep. All right.
Hey guys, just a quick little message. I want to thank you for all of your support. This fight means the world to us. There is nothing more important, and there is no cost we will not pay to fight it. One of the things that allows us to fight, especially with the lawsuit, we do have to have funding, and we have partnered with Century H2O. We partner with them because I absolutely believe in what they do, and I believe it is necessary. We've talked about how toxic the water is in this state. There is a reason we have the health issues that we have in this state. The people struggling with gender, all these issues that are coming up right now with the low testosterone, what's in the water, the pharmaceuticals that are being found in the water. Century H2O filters all of that out, but leaves the minerals which are designed your body needs. If you don't have a water system, please look into it. Check it out. They have a whole house system, but they also have something for those of you who can't afford it, just simply an under the sink RO unit that is just a little over $300, especially when you use our code, We Are the People. If it's something you're interested in, please go to our website, wearethepeople.org, click on Wellness, and then scroll down. You'll see the options, and make sure you put in We Are the People for your 10% discount. This is how we're funding our fight and also trying to make a difference at the same time. So thank you for all your support. Thank you for fighting with us. We believe in you. We believe this matters. There's nothing more important than the fight for freedom, and we're just thankful for everything all of you do to help us in the fight. God bless you, and we'll get back to the show.
Oops. All right. So this is the one I was talking about, A Church at War with Itself. This is from a talk that Elder Benson gave, and I'm just going to read the part that's highlighted. He's talking about the United Nations. He says, the increase of espionage activities by Soviet and satellite agents in our country, particularly those who strive to penetrate our government processes from the protection afforded them by diplomatic assignments in New York, in the United Nations, and in Washington. And again, I just want to contrast this with, we're going to talk about Beverly Campbell here in a few minutes. He's literally talking about the United Nations in Washington, and Beverly Campbell's entire job in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s is to be going to the United Nations in New York and dealing with politicians in Washington. So when I say that the church is at war with itself, like, I really believe that. And you can see it in Beverly Campbell's memoirs, where at this point, it's President Benson. He's no longer just an apostle, it's President Benson. And you can really see them stage managing this man, right? And they're not going to let him go too far off the track of what they believe.
It's crazy.
And they have these programs that they've developed and are doing. And so maybe war is too strong of a word.
No, I think
don't
so.
know, but
I think so. And it's pretty clear that Benson was on the losing side even when he became the prophet, because he was completely silenced. I mean,
yeah, not completely. I mean, he gave talks about the role of women, and like those things really bothered people like Beverly Campbell, and
but not like before. Like
no,
stuff
not like the secret combination.
The stuff he was saying before, and then once he was, it was almost a different person.
Yeah,
I'd agree.
Yep, I would agree. All right. This next one I just called Strange Bedfellows, and this is where the Central Intelligence Agency comes in.
Okay. I know some of our viewers have been asking about this as well.
Yeah. So, the CIA comes into existence late 40s, early 50s, and from everything that I can gather, the church is pretty much involved from the very beginning. But the very first document that I think is important for people to understand what's going on here is from the 1960s. So 64, I believe, is when this document is from. And this document just talks about the Mormons had come to the CIA. So the first thing to know is that by 64, the CIA and the Mormons were on good enough terms that when the CIA writes a memo, they just say the Mormon folks came and asked this. So they have an established relationship by 64. What the church was asking for was access to information that the CIA was putting in their, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, gazetteer? I don't know how to say that. They were producing these documents, and the church wanted access to the information that the CIA was putting out. And there's this discussion in the CIA about whether or not we should do it. But the interesting part of that is this. They end up giving it to the church, and they said, there's no intelligence interest in the Mormon compilation of millions of personal names for genealogical purposes, but rather in their machine methods, which allegedly were well ahead of the agency. Okay? So what they're saying there is that the church's technology was actually better than the Central Intelligence Agency's technology. So the CIA agrees to give the Mormons what they're asking for, and as quid pro quo, what they want in return is access to the church's technology.
Interesting.
Well, and what year did you say this was?
1964 is when this memo's from.
Well, and keep in mind, Project Monarch, MK Ultra, 1953 to 1973. So you're right in the midst of that.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm glad you brought up MK Ultra. A lot of people ask me about this. And I know you've had like J.R. Sweet on your show. Yeah. And I'll just say this, like in all the work that I've done regarding the Central Intelligence Agency in the church, I have not found any direct evidence, like documentary evidence, that any member of the church was running or a part of the CIA running MK Ultra. It just hasn't been. But as we know, it's not like the CIA is forthcoming with every document that they've ever
Right. Well, let's keep in mind
right?
two things. One, what was the CIA's mission? Do we know our mission will be complete when what?
Everything the people believe is a lie.
Yeah.
Roughly. We'll throw it up on the screen.
Sure.
And two, Michael Aquino. What do we know about him?
He had a Mormon wife and may have even lived in.
What was his? He was
psychological warfare.
Psychological warfare,
Yeah.
which is Operation, Project Mockingbird, or excuse
Monarch.
me, Monarch. He was a was it
Church of Satan?
He was. What was it? Church? It wasn't Church of Satan. What was it? He was part of.
I don't remember.
Temple of Set. I think it's Temple of Set. He was part
Temple
of
of Set.
some satanic organization. We'll get it on the screen. And who was his wife?
Well, his first wife was Janet Forbes, who was a Mormon from Provo, Utah.
So you, again, the ties there are. How about, let's just say, interesting.
Right.
Michael Aquino was a high-level officer in the National Security Agency. He was and is, you'll see him today,
practicing Satanist.
He created the Satanic Temple of Set, which he still runs. He was a high-level NSA officer. He's a member of the association. I used to be in the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, AFIO. He's a member of that. He's plugged in big time to the intelligence community, and he wrote a paper called Mind War. And Mind War was about psychological operations against populations, including the American, the domestic population, using Satanist techniques and tools.
Aquino was first involved in MK Ultra operations during the Vietnam War as part of the Phoenix program.
Well, first I've been involved in intelligence and psychological operations for about 40 years in all levels of it and across the intelligence community.
You are a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army.
Correct.
Now.
And it was uncovered that he was running a pedophile ring. I think 50 kids came out and fingered him as the guy that had done sexual acts on them as children. It went to trial. He walked from the trial successfully because he had a good attorney, despite the fact that there were multiple witnesses that said Aquino, through satanic rituals, had abused them as children. There's no question that he's a practicing Satanist.
And let's just back up one step further. And again, we talk about organizations that want to encourage the agency of man, and we talk about organizations that want to remove the agency of man. I cannot think of an organization inside of the United States of America that has been more consistently against allowing people to use their agency than the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yeah, all the propaganda.
Everything that they've done has been to remove the agency of man, whether it's political upheaval, whether it's Project or Operation Mockingbird or MK Ultra, whether it's Project Artichoke, whether it's Operation Gladio, whatever it is that they're doing, it's taking away the agency of some set of people that they think is on the wrong side of history. Which begs the question, why is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints involved with the Central Intelligence Agency in any capacity? Okay? Which it's kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke. I often, when I'm having these conversations with members of the church, I just often say this. If the Central Intelligence Agency is dealing with intelligence and they find Mormon prophets who are prophets, seers, and revelators, there could be no better source of intelligence than actual prophets, seers, and revelators. Despite that fact, the CIA is not recruiting prophets, seers, and revelators from the Mormon Church. They're recruiting returned missionaries with language skills and who follow authority and are clean cut and live lives, exemplary lives that aren't going to get them in trouble. But in the end, you kind of have to ask yourself, if the CIA really cares about intelligence and they have access to prophets, seers, and revelators, why do they need returned missionaries to gather intelligence in the first place? Right?
So what are all the connections do we have between the CIA and the church then?
Well, there are over 150 documents in CREST, which is the CIA's reading room for FOIA documents. Most of them have to do with things like they're tracking the Mormon Tabernacle Choir's tour schedule for some reason. They talk about Mullen, the Mullen Public Relations Company, which was the Bennett family, Skull and Bones family that we know was cut out for the Central Intelligence Agency in the 1970s. They're talking about torture programs that are developed by Mormons, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. They're talking about, they're always talking about recruiting the returned missionaries and where they need Mormons to be going different parts of the world, to be engaging in clandestine operations and those kinds of things. I mean, it's the members of the church are a huge part of the intelligence apparatus, not just the CIA, but the FBI, the NSA, Department of Homeland Security, all of them, right? And so
part of that, I would say, is probably due to the cultural follow authority, trust authority.
Sure. Well, and so the thing that really brought them together, in my opinion, was anti-communism. Okay? So the CIA really needed
the
communism.
CIA on the surface, anti-communism, which absolutely not.
Well, they needed communism because they wanted to establish democracy or democratic republics around the world, and so they were willing to do whatever it took. On the flip side of that, the church really needed communism to go away because it was stifling the ability of the church to preach the gospel to all the world, which is prophesied will happen. And so, like, again, you talk about strange bedfellows. They come together because pragmatically, there's technology that can be shared, and there's a common interest in defeating communism. And that's where it starts. But then, of course, communism goes away, and now you've got thousands of members of the church inside of these intelligence. And not only that, it started before that. You know, Bruce McConkie was Army intelligence, during the World Wars. A lot of church members were in the intelligence apparatus of the United States military, right? And then transitioned into organizations like the FBI and CIA.
At some point, I think it's going to come out the depth of the LDS Church of Satan and the leadership. And I think it'll be very interesting to look at that correlation with the CIA, with, again, what was Michael Quino? The interest in mind control.
Well, sure, and creating satanic panic, right?
Overlap.
Yeah.
Project Operation Mockingbird project. What they were doing with Hitler is basically trying to scientifically create and mind slaves and fracture people the way that these religious organizations have been doing it throughout time.
Well, and keep in mind, Aquino and he almost Temple of Set and all of that needs its own show because it's such a rabbit hole. He was a U.S. Army officer specializing in psychological operations and PSYOPs.
At the same time, Michael Flynn was there.
Right.
Who you said we'd talk a little bit about Tim Ballard. So Michael Flynn is the one who picked Tim Ballard up off the floor after the sexual abuse allegations, and he sent Boone Cutler out to Tim Ballard. And now Tim is traveling the world again, doing what he's doing in Syria and so on and so forth. And so Mike Flynn, just this week I saw a post where he talks about very openly how they lie to people, how they're trying to control people's minds and those kinds of things. So again, like, these are just conversations that need to be had.
And are they not, several of them, part of the
Knights of Templar?
Knights of Templar?
It's Malta. Knights of Malta, if I remember right. Yeah, so the hat that Tim Ballard wears now has the cross and then the 4 crosses, which is the same as the tattoo that the head of the Department of War,
Hegsworth,
Hegseth, has. And so there's this idea out there, and we're skipping ahead quite a bit, but like, there's the Christian nationalists, right? And there's this idea that we need to restore America to its greatness by restoring it to be a Christian nation. And I'll let people decide what they believe about that. But I think that we're at a stage of history where it's pretty difficult to deny that there's a group of people who sincerely believe this and are acting to make it happen, right? And it just so happens that a former member of the church, Tim Ballard, seems to be a part of this group of people.
Well, let's get to that, because I think, well, when you're ready, I don't want to skip around too much, because this is a lot of very important conversation, and it's heavy, because I think a lot of people, the idea of Christian nationalism sounds so good to Christians who are also nationalists, but
and there's this big
there's
revitalization
such a psyop
right
going
now.
on. There's such a psyop going on, which is
and the revitalization that's happening is good.
Again, the pendulum swinging, but let's I don't want to hijack your conversation.
We tried to go linear at least.
Yeah. We were going to try to keep this to an hour and a half, but that's not going to happen either.
Yeah.
So
all right, go ahead.
It's good.
This is just wild.
So we'll roll through it. So the Mormon apostle does become the president of Rotary International in 1966. Okay. One thing I do want to point out is there was another president of Rotary International who was a Mormon, and his last name is King. The reason that's important is that the head of Rotary International in 1911 was a king, and in the first class of Skull and Bones was a king. So you see these generational ties, these families. It's an aristocracy, right? There's a patronage network inside of the church, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, look, even the ritual stuff, it is all about your bloodlines.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so let's keep going. We're going to to the 1970s now. David M. Kennedy is an incredibly important part of church history that almost nobody knows anything about. They know that the BYU has the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies. That's where I got my degree from. That's did a degree in international studies, and that's where I got that school is where I got my degree from. What people don't recognize is that David M. Kennedy was an incredibly influential and powerful person inside the government, right? He was Nixon's Treasury Secretary, so probably the third most powerful person in the country, okay? As that sort of winds itself down, it doesn't last very long, but up to that point, he's getting all kinds of positions of power, and he becomes friends with a banker by the name of Sindona. So Sindona is Opus Dei, which is Catholicism's secret system, one of Catholicism's most important and powerful secret societies. And David M. Kennedy gets wrapped up with Sindona to the point where Sindona ends up dead. He ends up convicted for all kinds of crimes and that kind of thing. David M. Kennedy gets sued by the Italian government, if I remember right, or a company inside of Italy, but ends up getting off on some technicalities through lawfare, right? So, but he's tied in with the most powerful people in the world through Sindona, and the fact that he was the head of Continental Illinois, which was one of the world's biggest banks at the time that he was leading it. So that saying "too big to fail" we think started in 2008. The saying "too big to fail" came from Continental Illinois shortly after David M. Kennedy left, because they had grown the business so much to consumers. It used to be a business banking. He wanted to spread it out amongst the larger society, but they ran it into the ground, and the government first intervened with Continental Illinois, and that's where "too big to fail" came from, okay? Here's the thing to know about this. In 1970, David M. Kennedy shows up at the Bohemian Grove, okay? So we know that Wilford Woodruff was at the Bohemian Club much, much earlier in San Francisco. That's where he dies. But everybody knows about the Bohemian Grove, right? This is where they burn the effigy. This is where they put the people in coffins. They walk them down there in red robes, the whole thing. And David M. Kennedy is the guest of the president of Bank of America, and he's there in 1970, which just happens to be the same year that Ronald Reagan was at Bohemian Grove. The reason that's important, at least in my opinion, is that you see the ascendance of political power inside of Mormonism from David M. Kennedy up through the Reagan administration, which is really the zenith of Mormon political power, okay? I don't think we really talk about it too much. Oh, we do a little bit. So I'm going to hold off on that. We're going to keep moving.
Which actually, I just fact-checked you. You talk about Reagan in power, so we're looking in the 80s. Continental failed 1984.
Okay.
So.
Yep. So it just so happens that, you've got tremendous Mormon political power at the same time that David M. Kennedy's former bank is failing, and the government chooses to intervene, and this saying "too big to fail" becomes a part of the nomenclature, right? Okay. He's at Bohemian Grove in 1970. Then Spencer Kimball pulls in David Kennedy into the church office building, okay? And he also there's 3 programs. I remember 2 of them. The third one was the International Mission Program. But basically, Spencer W. Kimball is very frustrated because the gospel isn't spreading as fast as he would like it to. Everybody knows the story of him standing up and saying we need to lengthen our stride. Yeah. And then Gordon B. Hinckley saying that was the best meeting I've ever been to, like regional representative meeting or something like that, 70s or something. So what people don't understand is that he was just really frustrated because there was this prophecy, there was this mission of the church to spread the gospel far and wide. It wasn't happening. David M. Kennedy gives them the opportunity to get into nations because he knows all of the treasury secretaries all around the world. So he can make the introductions that are necessary. The church is working with the CIA. Governments are toppling, right? Are beginning to, like that, those cracks are beginning to show in the world order. And so the important thing to understand about this, though, is it was not done under priesthood authority, okay? So Spencer Kimball brings in Kennedy and Beverly Bruff Campbell, and they set up these programs, and here's what it says about Kennedy in particular. Though not ordained as the general authority, Kennedy had immediate access to the first presidency, received assignments only from them, and reported only to them. He and Kimball met frequently to examine countries one by one, exploring the possibilities each offered. Kimball advised him to keep the other members of the first presidency updated, but did not stipulate similar briefings for other general authorities. The situation placed Kennedy outside the normal channels of church governance. I think that's very important, okay? There's another quote from the same paper that just talks about how it's not only outside of normal church governance, it's outside of priesthood channels. So what you have now is in the church office building, in addition to all the things that are going on that are church-related, that are being operated through priesthood channels, you now have, so Tim Ballard has been talking about the deep church. I don't think he really knows what he means when he says that, but I would say that this is probably where the genesis of the deep church, okay, is when you get Kennedy, you get Campbell, and you start setting up situations, you start setting up programs inside the church office building that aren't being run under priesthood authority anymore. And now you've got two organizations running parallel.
Like the Strengthening Members Committee.
Strengthening the Church Members is a really good example, but there's an even better one that we're going to talk about coming up here really soon called the Special Affairs Committee. And I'll tell you what, I'll show you what I think the fruits of this is, right? So when you step outside of church authority, there's going to be fruits of that. And I'm going to show you one fruit that I think is very important, okay? All right, so we hop ahead to 1980. And again, this is the height of Mormon political power. Something that I don't think people really understand or know a lot about is W. Cleon Skousen, okay? So Cleon Skousen, very important member of the church, also good friends with David O. McKay, also good friends with Ezra Taft Benson, worked for the FBI, was a professor at BYU on and off.
Wrote The Naked Communist.
Wrote The Naked Communist, which is why this talks about Glenn Beck, because Glenn Beck's entire shtick is really based off of Cleon Skousenite theology, if you want to call it that, or philosophy is maybe a better way of saying that, a softer way of saying that. But there's an even more important organization that Cleon Skousen was a charter member of that I would pretty much guarantee that nobody who's watching this knows about. And that's called the Council for National Policy. And this is a very interesting situation because the Council for National Policy is evangelicals. And at this time in history, the Mormons and the evangelicals aren't getting along all that great. Like the history between evangelicals and Mormons is usually antagonistic because evangelicals don't believe that Mormons are Christians. But again, you have a situation with the anti-communism and the need for political power where you get these alliances that you normally wouldn't see. And in this case, it's through Cleon Skousen. Now, I don't have time to go into the Council for National Policy, and it's, based out of Racine, Wisconsin, and there's a whole thing about Racine, Wisconsin. I don't have time to go into it. People are going to have to look into this for themselves. But you have to understand that pretty much everything you're seeing in conservative politics today stems from the Council for National Policy, including the Charlie Kirk situation. Charlie Kirk was a member of the Council for National Policy, including the impeachment situation. Mike Pence is a part of the Council for National Policy, okay? So this is an organization, it's a secret organization that some of the membership lists have been leaked, but people need to look at this and they need to understand that the church gained access to this through people like Beverly Bruff Campbell and Cleon Skousen, who were in Washington and at the United Nations in New York, and they gained access to these inner circles of power that are largely responsible for the political climate that we see today, at least one side of it, okay? All right. In 1984, we have another document that shows the ties between LDS, what I call LDS Inc., with the Central Intelligence Agency. This document just simply is the CIA at BYU recruiting. This is when Jeffrey Holland is the president of Brigham Young University. They're there. They're meeting with the brethren. They call them the elders. They say that the elders endorse the mission of the CIA. The church indicated its endorsement of the agency's mission, and its elders plan to meet and address any concerns about our recruiting effort and its possible undercutting of the church's image. So what's important about this is that the elders of the church, that's going to be your apostles, okay? They knew that doing business with the Central Intelligence Agency had the potential to undercut the church's image. They knew. So nobody can say that they were ignorant of this or that they were naive. No, they're very sophisticated, very bright human beings who understood that by teaming up with this group of people, that if it became widely known in the public, it could very well undercut the church's image. And in my opinion, if people really understood the relationship between the church and the CIA, it would undercut.
Yeah.
That would be a consequence.
It's a major red flag to us.
Yeah, of what's happened there.
I think you skipped over something. I mean, we could do sub-shows on just about anything, but going back to the Council of what is it?
Council for National Policy.
Council for National Policy and the Kirk connection there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you'll get into this, but it's often compared, but acts exclusively as the right-wing conservative counterpart of the Council of Foreign Relations, to which...
You got it. Two wings, right?
So you have
one bird.
The right-leaning wing and then the left-leaning wing, both tied to Kirk, and given the assassination of Kirk at UVU, and you have the now outgoing president, Astrid Jimenez, who is a permanent member of the Council for Foreign Relations.
And Garrett Gong, who's an apostle in the Mormon Church, who is also on the Council for Foreign Relations.
Yeah, I really hope our listeners understand, like literally Ezra Taft Benson said that was the Council for Foreign Relations was the hub of the global secret combination.
Sure.
I mean, they're clearly a and so I did not know this. So that's the other side of it.
Right. It is the right wing.
It was created to counterbalance the influence of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Oh, okay, to counterbalance it.
But as we've talked about, they're all in each other's Rolodex.
And everything gets infiltrated.
Yeah, they're all in each other's Rolodex. They're all at Davos together. They're all so they're frenemies, right, if you will.
But the intersection of it all happening with the Kirk assassination at UVU, you have a member of the CNR with the member of the CIA. It seems all too coincidental. And with all the conspiracies that are flying around.
Interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, interesting.
Sorry, that was a light bulb moment for me.
I'm sure there's a lot to that.
And I think the important thing to understand is that whatever the church was, again, the history that we get is the church was this pioneer organization that came across their small group of people. Whatever the church was, that is no longer what the church is. The church is now deeply enmeshed in the highest levels of power in the nation and the world, right?
Kind of what I almost hear you saying is, did the church end up making friends with Babylon, with Mammon, with the devil, in order to fulfill the purposes that were prophesied?
So I believe that. So that's if I had to state my hypothesis in one sentence, that would be it. Basically, that what ended up happening is sometime around the railroad, right? Very early on in church history, there was a choice placed in front of people, and what we ended up having was double-minded men. Through the railroad company, through the sugar company, through fraternities, through political power, there have been choices that have been made throughout history, and loyalty to the Lord was not the highest principle in these men's lives.
But
and they were willing to make secret oaths.
We'll do these oaths and these dark things in order to help the church's mission move forward, which is good.
Yeah.
But yet, I guess that's how Satan, right? Wait, I'll make you great at this. I'll make you great at this. Make a deal with me, and we'll give you. It's
very much an Adam and Eve story. Like one way of thinking about history is just a repetition of the Adam and Eve story, where God comes and gives you a commandment, and then you get overexcited, and Satan presents an opportunity for you to accomplish what you think God wants you to accomplish, and you do it, but it's a sin or a transgression.
You do it through
right,
but you use the adversary's power instead of God's.
Yeah, and then everybody else has to decide.
But then who's the God? Then who are they worshiping?
Sure. So I think that's a very powerful way of looking at Mormon history, as a repetition of the Adam and Eve story over and over again, and watching the leaders of the church make their decision about whom they're going to serve.
Well, once you make a deal with the devil, I think it's very clear which God you serve.
Sure. And I think it's very much up for debate. I guess it just depends on what you mean by a deal with the devil. We all make bad decisions
Sure.
in our sphere of influence.
Right. And there's bad decisions, and then there's also decisions that are evil.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think
there's depths of, like, corruption's one thing, and I think there's clearly examples of corruption here. But then there's other levels of making friends with mammon that are some of the examples in here are a little bit beyond just corruption.
And I think we're going to get to one of those here
let's
in
hear
just a
it.
couple minutes. So the first thing, though, I want to talk about is the Special Affairs Committee that I talked about, okay? And I just want to point out this. So we've all been on ward councils. We've all been in leadership in the church. And we know that the church is a record-keeping church, right? We've been commanded to keep records. The church gets involved with the Central Intelligence Agency. They set up the Special Affairs Committee. There's only 3 organizations that I'm aware of in the world that have a Special Affairs Committee. The Central Intelligence Agency, Scientology, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are the 3 organizations that have that.
Wow.
Okay, so not only that, but Beverly Bruff Campbell in her memoirs writes this. She was like in the Special Affairs Committee, and she writes, the Special Affairs Group did not work from an agenda, nor were notes kept of the deliberations, and it was based out of Washington, D.C., okay? So this is a group of people who aren't keeping records, who aren't willing to tell you what the agenda is that they're talking about. It's a very secret, clandestine group operating, again, outside of the church office building, but outside of priesthood channels. And then she literally just says, I will not go further into the items that were discussed. I'll tell you the kinds of things that I think were being discussed, okay? When Dick and Brenda Miles get accused of being a part of a pedophilic ritual abuse ring, I think that goes to the Special Affairs Committee. And this is the group of the most powerful people inside the church who can pull the strings that need to be pulled inside of the legal community, inside of media, and so on and so forth. And these are the things that are going to really hurt the church's image or assets if the Special Affairs Committee doesn't take care of it. Okay? That's my opinion. Now, of
So they're
course,
like PR arm almost?
I think, but like even more hands-on than that. I think PR would be one of the things that they would be. That's why Beverly Campbell was there, right? Was to handle that. But you also have people like Ralph Hardy, who was an extremely powerful lawyer. You have Bob Barker, who was like, he's like a mysterious figure that I've never quite figured out, but
Not The Price is Right.
Not The Price is Right. No, super powerful lawyer in Washington, D.C. that's part of the Special Affairs Committee. I think that it's just this, like, if you want to think about it as like the Navy SEALs of the church, like when something's going down and it's really going to hurt the church's image or assets, it goes to the Special Affairs Committee. They hop into action and they just do whatever it takes to cover it up. So in the case of Brenda Miles, you've got Ralph Hardy sending Russell M. Nelson abuse cover-up instructions, right? That David Hardy takes directly to Russell M. Nelson at the church office building. You've got Ralph Hardy talking to Deseret News, right? In like 2018, probably not Ralph Hardy, but you've got another, that case resurfaces in 2018, and you've got Tad Walsh writing horrific propaganda pieces in the Deseret News, not even mentioning the victims of the abuse and how they had to have surgery, never mentioning the name of the pedophile who's been abusing since the 1970s, right? And that's all coming through the Special Affairs Committee.
Gotcha.
It's
Right?
like unconventional warfare meets PR meets...
Yeah. It's just a very special elite group. I mean, they literally call themselves the Special Affairs Group, right?
I hear people talk about the church having like a mafia arm. You ever hear anything of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so that's mostly Las Vegas. Howard Hughes was controlled by the gay family, right, who ends up being business partners with Mitt Romney at Bain Capital. So that's a whole, and I didn't get into that. Heidi Love from Unfiltered Rise is amazing at that stuff. She's really dug deep into that. But that's a whole nother thing. Las Vegas was largely founded through the help of Mormons.
Really?
Yeah.
And the mafia, like the true mafia, not just...
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, and you've got the Mormon corridor. You've got most of Arizona, Maricopa County, a huge hotbed of corruption, largely Mormon run, right? And I didn't even think about adding that stuff in here. I never get more emails saying you need to be careful than when I talk about Maricopa County.
Is that right?
Yeah. So for whatever that's all about. So,
maybe we should do a show on Maricopa County.
Or mafia ties or...
yeah. So interesting. I mean, just interesting
Okay.
stuff.
I don't know, you'll wake up with a horse head in your
I
bed
know,
or something.
right? Something like that. Something like that. So now we're up to 1990. We're making progress. And this is where you start talking about evil, right? And I think this is where the potential, I mean, a lot of it's evil, but this is where it gets, for me, it hurts my heart, and it sort of crosses that line, because this is where the Pace memo shows up. And you've got Glenn Pace. We did a whole show on this that people can go watch. But the idea here is that the church becomes aware of allegations of Satanism and ritual abuse inside the church. And instead of addressing it directly, they poo-poo Glenn Pace's memo, where he says that he believes that it's actually happening. He interviews dozens of people, and the church just papers it over. And then they use that sort of special affairs committee group to go to the Chicago Tribune, and they talk about satanic panic, and they say, we just don't think this is an issue. And in this period of time, it's not just ritual abuse. People need to understand that this is the period when so much abuse is being covered up in the church.
Well, and keep in mind, going back to Michael Aquino, who you were talking about before, this is also during his time. And a lot of this, he was just a known Satanist. I mean, he wasn't even overt about it. And just a few things to clean up from earlier, because I think we might have misspoke. He was part of the Church of, or was it the
Temple
Church
of Set?
No, he was part of the Church of Satan, but then he broke off from that and created the Temple of Set. Okay. This is all around the same time. And then his wife, that was the Mormon, was actually Lilith Aquino.
Yeah.
So just wanted to clean that up, because this is all tied to the same period of time and the rise of Satanism.
Yeah.
So are you saying the satanic panic that was it was a big thing here in Utah, but it was also a national thing around the same time. Are you saying that came out of the special affairs committee, or that came out
I think it came out of the American intelligence community, not the church special affairs.
But you think the leadership here in Utah was influential in the satanic panic, creating that narrative nationally as well?
I think there's no question about that.
Oh,
I think when you look at the cases that were in Utah, they often were referring to satanic panic, and they were especially utilizing the strategy in court cases about recovered memories, right? And so
Utah is amazing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think if you so like there's a leap here, and I want to be really clear about that. Like, there is no A, B, C.
Yeah.
We're going from A to C or A to D here.
Right.
But when you recognize that the church has been involved with the Central Intelligence Agency and the American intelligence apparatus for decades, 5 decades at this point, and you realize that the satanic panic, the idea of satanic panic, comes from the American intelligence community, it kind of makes sense that the church is going to latch onto that, because then you have the protection of the Central Intelligence Agency, right?
Yeah, fascinating.
So anyway, that's my opinion about that.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked about Ensign Peak. You didn't use the words Ensign Peak, but you talked about it a little bit earlier. We get to 1996-ish through 2023 is when they finally get caught. But now all of a sudden you have lawless prophets. It's not just covering things up. Now you have them actually breaking laws. And your average member of the church is so ignorant about what happened here with Ensign Peak.
By design.
By design, right? So the church's response was very curt. They settle the case, they make a statement, and they say, as far as we're concerned, this is over. And every good soldier in the church says this is over, and they just forget it and they move on. It's not hard to understand what happened at Ensign Peak. The document is not that long. The SEC document that goes through the settlement and why the facts, like there's literally a section of the document called facts where everybody can learn that it wasn't just the first presidency that was involved. It was also the Council on the Disposition of Tithes, which is all the members of the Quorum of the 12. They all knew. They all knew.
Wait, for our viewers that are not members, what is Ensign Peak?
So Ensign Peak, well, okay. So again, I don't want to get myself in trouble because I'm not an expert in this area, but Ensign Peak is basically a company that manages the money of the church, including the tithes. Okay, and that's so what I copied here. We'll just read it. It says the church created Ensign Peak in 1997 as an integrated auxiliary of the church to manage the church's investment securities. Ensign Peak has no shareholders or members. The securities portfolio managed by Ensign Peak consists of what the church calls reserve funds, or reserves, which include U.S. equity and debt securities purchased with excess tithing. So that's probably the biggest misconception, because the church does not want you to know that they were using excess tithing. But in the document that is the settlement, so the church agreed to the settlement, they signed the settlement, and it says right in the settlement that they were using excess tithing to purchase debt securities. Okay.
So this is Ensign Peak Advisors.
Ensign Peak Advisors, yeah. One of many, but like probably the biggest, but yeah, one of many groups that manages money for the church.
And it's estimated to be a fund worth over $100 billion, the portfolio.
Yeah, the Widow's Mite are the experts on this, and they just came out with a report a few weeks ago with an updated number, which I don't remember what it is.
Well, it says the firm faced SEC fines in 2023 for using shell companies to hide the true sides of its actual holdings.
Correct, and that's where the law breaking comes in. So the church was setting up shell companies, and then even more important than that, what they would do is there were documents that had to be signed, and they would send the back page of that document, and the person signing it would attest, like the attestation on the back of the document was, I have read this document and I attest to the fact that everything in the document is true. But they never saw the whole document because the church was only sending the back page to sign. They would sign it, they would send it back, and then the church would send it into the SEC. There was all kinds of lawless behavior. More important than that, though, was the church laws that were being broken, okay? There's a section in the Doctrine and Covenants, I want to say it's D&C 120, I may be off on that, but it speaks directly to how the disposition, it speaks directly to the disposition of the tithes of the church. And it's like one verse. And in that verse, it says, it's like a thus saith the Lord twice. It's one of very few scriptures, very few verses, very directly from the Lord. And it says, by my own mouth, right? Like they are to distribute the tithing money by the mouth of the Lord. So what the church has to argue here is that the Lord was telling them to set up shell companies. The Lord was telling them to have people sign documents that they hadn't read. The Lord was telling them to break the law, or they have to admit that they weren't following the scriptures.
I remember when that came out, and what year was that? That was probably 2021.
2023.
2023.
Jeez.
I believe.
And it was recent. And what's hard is even in 2023, which is recent, I remember when that came out thinking, I'm sure the church knew what they were doing. I'm sure, as a church, maybe I had cognitive dissonance, but I didn't. My thing is the church is clearly innocent of any wrongdoing. I'm sure it was whatever it was is,
targeting
maybe,
Sure.
or
Sure.
maybe is, something that wasn't really there. And this just shows you how easy it is as members, how we're just kind of trained to just not question, not ask questions and I remember it's about the church's wealth and all the money here, money there. And the Lord's using that money to prepare for the second coming. The Lord needs the church to be this big, wealthy organization. And again, just not allowing myself to ask questions. And I think that's where I kind of fell into that cult mentality of just whatever they say is right. And it's obviously of God. And I'm not in a position to even question. It's whatever they say must always be true in perfection.
Well, and you think about this malicious practice just in society. I mean, how many times do you agree to terms and conditions, on your phone for an app or Netflix or whatever it might be, and you're signing off on something? It's very Black Mirror.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so, and again, this is one of those cases where different people can look at the facts and come to different conclusions. I know a lot of people who say avoiding taxes is really morally good. And they're if the church can do it, however they do it, fine.
And I would probably have,
because taxation is theft.
Yeah, I think there's many positions you can
corrupt
take on this.
taxation.
I just take the position that we have articles of faith that say that we believe in honoring, obeying, and sustaining the law. And if we don't like the law, we don't break the law, we change the law. But the church decided not to do that. The church decided they were going to break the law, and they knew they were breaking the law.
Yeah.
They absolutely knew they were breaking the law. Okay?
So they lost.
They lost. Well, they settled.
Mm-hmm.
They probably would have lost if they had gone to court, but they settled. So a lot of people want to argue with me that it wasn't a legal case, but it's in the litigation folder of the SEC's website. You don't have litigation unless a law has been broken.
Was Kirk and McConkie involved with that?
I don't know.
Curious.
They may just deal with more abuse, covering up abuse.
Yeah. So speaking of abuse, we now get to the point in the presentation where we talk about prophets, predators, and punishers. And we're going to talk very briefly about the LDS Church's relationship with Gordon Bowen, which, again, we have a whole show on this that people can go watch if they want to.
You have to watch it. If you haven't watched it, you have to watch it. It's called The Punisher.
So Gordon Bowen is alleged to be a punisher in a group that is alleged to exist inside of the church called the LDS Church of Satan that is engaged in ritual abuse of children. That is controversial. What's not controversial is that Gordon Bowen has been accused of other abuse by grown men. We know that he has called male escort services thousands of times. We know that he's homosexual and he believed that the homosexuality was caused by evil spirits. We know that he used David Hamblin, who was another person that was abusing children all throughout this period. He was using David Hamblin as his therapist for decades, really.
And David Hamblin ties to the Hamblin girls' victim statements, which actually ties to the case we're being sued over.
That's right. That's right. And
It all comes back to that.
So here's the critical thing to understand for people who are trying to judge whether or not these are 15 men you can trust completely and assess for themselves how we got to where we got. So what I can tell you is that I know with absolute certainty that at least half a dozen apostles knew intimately the things that were going on in Gordon Bowen's life and chose to not confront the evil in front of them, but chose to continue to do business with Gordon Bowen to the point where they were paying this man tens of millions of dollars to make movies about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, even though part of what they knew is that Gordon Bowen was writing homoerotic, pornographic stories about Jesus Christ, right?
And you can go to the Lynn Packer presentations on those too.
That's probably the best source that's public right now about that. And so, but I can, like we're all members, or we were members of the church, but like I can bear my testimony, like, because I've seen the evidence that at least a half a dozen of the most prominent men, prophets and apostles they know. Our current prophet, Dallin H. Oaks, knows exactly who Gordon Bowen is. He knows exactly what Gordon Bowen does, and he chooses to just balk in the face of evil and allow it to continue.
Well, and they associate with him. They play pickleball. They're at his house all the time. I mean, we have so many people coming forward talking about
I wouldn't be surprised if he was still working on church projects to this very day.
It's in your face.
Yeah, that would be my guess. So anyway, like we said, we have a whole 2 hour or whatever it is conversation. So we're continuing
Birds of a feather.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, like we talked about in the presentation, my biggest concern about that is just you start with railroads, you go to sugar companies, you get with the CIA, you're in Skull and Bones. All of a sudden you meet a Gordon Bowen, you do something you shouldn't do, because we know that Gordon Bowen has done so many things that he ought not to. By his own admission in his own journals, he talks about the sins that he's committed. He's very ashamed of them, right? But you do something you ought not to, and now Gordon Bowen has you on a leash. Yeah. He's got a flaxen cord around your neck, and you have to do business with him for the next 40 years, because what if you find out one of the people that Gordon Bowen was very close to was Boyd K. Packer, who very publicly was like very anti-homosexual, but was very close to Gordon Bowen, right? Like, you just find yourself in situations that you don't want to find yourselves in. And the frustrating thing for me as a member of the church is, what did we learn growing up in the church? Be careful about who you associate with so that you don't find yourself in compromising situations. And yet, in the end, what you find out is that the prophets and apostles are associating with people of very questionable character for decades and putting themselves in very compromising situations. And then instead of addressing it and having integrity, they just make sure that nobody learns about it. Right? Yeah. They paper it over, they whitewash it. So I think this is where it gets to the point where you can talk about, like, does it cross over to evil? And then we talk about the next thing. So we observe the fruits. The CIA stuff starts with, hey, we like your technology. It moves on to, hey, we want your return missionaries. It ends in 2012 with a Mormon bishop getting caught helping the CIA develop enhanced interrogation techniques, otherwise known as torture. So you now have members of the church who are developing torture programs for the Central Intelligence Agency and being called by inspiration as bishops in the church. Now, he had to step down as a bishop when this came out because, of course, you can't have a bishop who's developing torture programs. But
I will tell you this, the LDS Church of Satan sure has mastered torturing.
Sure.
Well, and the origins of the CIA post-World War II, where they got a lot of their intel from the Jewish concentration camps.
Sure. So, but this is where, like, you talk about the fruits, right? You plant a seed with the CIA, and what you end up with is members of the church engaging in torture, like developing torture programs. Like, that is not Christian in any way, shape, or form. I don't care what you think about the children of God on the other side of the conflict. Yeah. You don't develop torture programs to waterboard them, electrocute them, like humiliate them, psychologically torture, right? That's not what it is, right? But that's where we ended up. Okay, documented.
And we've met with multiple survivors to substantiate some of those claims. Yeah. With clear memories that corroborate each other.
Yeah. All right, we're getting close to the end here. So more about prophets protecting pedophiles. So like the best example of this that I really know about, or the one that bothers me the most, I guess, and probably because I spent so much time on it, was the Miles case. And in that situation, you have Russell M. Nelson covering up abuse for decades, despite receiving abuse cover-up instructions directly from the hands of David Eccles Hardy, despite the fact that he knew that Bill Carstensen was a diagnosed pedophile, despite the fact that he knew that Bill went on to abuse other children. In 2018, he chooses to employ, or maybe that's not the right way to say that because we don't know who employed exactly, but the relationship between Jim Jardine and Russell M. Nelson is well established because Russell M. Nelson was Alan Key, Jim Jardine was Skull and Bones and Alan Key, and Jim Jardine ends up being the lawyer for Brenda and Dick Miles. And they engage in some of the most nefarious behavior that I can imagine in terms of an abuse case and making sure that nobody learns about what actually happened in that case. And so the thing that makes me a little bit crazy about that is here's what President Nelson says in conference. Abuse constitutes the influence of the adversary and is a grievous sin. Let me be perfectly clear. Any kind of abuse of women, children, or anyone is an abomination to the Lord. He mourns, and we all mourn, for each person who has fallen victim to abuse of any kind. Okay? Now, I am a person who probably leans too heavy into justice. But when I see a man like Russell M. Nelson make that statement in conference, knowing what I know about how he treated the victims of abuse, it just makes me so crazy.
Yeah, it makes me furious.
Okay.
The hypocrisy.
That's why I have a hard time. I have a hard time with, you know what I mean, listening to some things these men say when knowing what actually they're doing.
Yeah,
It's
I'm not going to
painful.
use her name, but there is a little girl who was abused by Bill Carstensen, the pedophile that was only allowed to abuse because Russell M. Nelson covered it up in 1986, who had to have multiple surgeries to repair the damage done to her by Bill Carstensen. And when Russell M. Nelson covered this up in 2018, he didn't mourn with that little girl. He got Tad Walsh to write a story in the Deseret News that never mentioned Bill Carstensen's name, nor the name of this little girl, who was no longer a little girl. She was a grown woman at this point. But he didn't mourn with those who needed to mourn. He covered it up because it was going to affect the image and assets of the church. So the hypocrisy there is stunning to me. And Russell M. Nelson is a whole different thing. But that's evil.
It is evil.
In my opinion.
It is evil. It's absolutely evil.
To treat an abuse victim the way that he treated them and then to go in front of a worldwide church as a shepherd.
That's
as
a prophet.
Yeah.
No, that is not of God.
Yeah.
It's of a different God.
Yeah. So then we have the literal godsend. We've talked about this. I think this is where people really became aware of the problem. It caused a schism in the church. There are many people who left the church at this point who've never come back. And again, you just talk about the fruits. Like when you've got a church, which is really a corporation, like a corporate soul, that is willing to let the sheep suffer, it's just part of the cost of business at times. Eventually, you're going to have a rupture. In this case, the rupture happened from 1911, getting in bed with Rotary International in the United Nations, who were so focused on vaccination, right? All of a sudden, 100 years later, you end up in a situation where there's a worldwide pandemic. And because you're in bed with these organizations, you have to go along with it because they're your partners.
Yeah, well, you have to go along with the lie.
Yeah, and so
what strengthens the lie.
And so you end up with good global citizen, which is like the craziest thing I've ever heard a prophet say. You can't be a good global citizen. There's no such thing as global citizenship.
Well, not according to the World Economic Forum and the United Nations,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, and not yet, right? Maybe there will be a chance to be a good global citizen, but that time is not now.
Yeah.
Sounds like a
Well,
comrade.
it's conditioning. It's
Yeah.
conditioning and grooming.
Yeah. So that's where we end up, sort of, right? One other quick thing is just I wanted to show people the kinds of organizations that the church is working with. And like you said, using tithing money and so on and so forth. So Just Serve seems to be a great idea, right? But it stems really from Rotary International. There's an organization in Rotary that's specifically just for service, and it's for youth specifically. And so eventually the Mormons sort of copy that, and it's called Just Serve. Here is who's on the advisory council. I'm going to read the company names, not the people's names, because you won't know the people. American Red Cross, Catholic Relief Society, Post News Group, the America's Service Commission, Rotary International is on the advisory board. Then you have Sharon Eubank from the church. You have Salvation Army. You have 2 people from Salvation Army. And then you have IsraAid, which is obviously Israel, right? So this is the advisory council for Just Serve. And these are people, all of whom are deeply entrenched with Rotary International and the United Nations. The church has clearly taken a side here. Mm-hmm. And you can believe what you want to about the side that they've taken. I don't really care about that.
I mean, funding, church funding the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I mean, funding all these organizations and funding abortion and funding like all the wrong things.
Sure. Yeah. So
tithe payer money.
So again, the beautiful thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ is that everybody gets their agency. Like, we're at the end of this presentation pretty much. And I've presented a certain set of facts that probably most people don't know about. They don't know about this history because the church chooses to occult it, right? They choose to hide this history. And the beautiful thing is nobody has to listen to me, and I don't have to share my opinion about what it is. Everybody gets to use their agency. They get to go pray about it. They get to do their own research. I have 2-hour presentations on many of the things that we talked about. Like, this is barely skimming the surface.
Why don't we put links to those?
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah. And so, but the beautiful thing is everybody gets to go make up their own mind, right? So to end, all I have to say is this. I'm just being a little bit snarky because I'm just that way. And just this last week, though, Salt Lake's air quality was the worst in the United States. So they said it like being in Salt Lake is like smoking 3 cigarettes a day if you're walking outside.
No, there was an actual smell outside when you walk outside.
So my question is, we started this presentation talking about the establishment of Zion. Like, is this Zion? Walking around in a cloud of haze? Like, having the effect of smoking. You can't even live in Salt Lake and keep the word of wisdom anymore, right? So
at least
is that,
metaphorically speaking?
Yeah, is that Zion? The other thing that's going on right now that's really important, and we can spend as much time on this as we want to, is this idea of the North American technate.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
This almost needs its own show.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, but what we really want to talk about is what would Utah's role be in this? So let's just back up for 1 second and talk about the technate itself, and then we'll talk about Utah's role inside of it, based on what we've learned today. So the North American technate comes, interestingly, from Canada is where this started. And Elon Musk's grandfather, a man by the name of Joshua Haldeman, was a vocal advocate of the technocracy movement. So technocracy is simply government run by scientists or technicians instead of politicians, okay? Which sounds great.
Very scary.
Until you realize that it always ends up with eugenics. That's like, it inevitably ends up with eugenics because the thing that you want to maximize is human life, right? And so anyway, so Elon Musk's grandfather is a part of this. And the biggest part of technocracy was this idea of the North American technate. The important thing to recognize about the North American technate is if you look at this map, it starts in the north with Greenland and it ends in the south with Venezuela. So anybody who's been paying attention to current events should perk up at this point because we just took over Venezuela and we're in the process of trying to take at least parts of Greenland. It sounds like today, like it's different, a little bit of a different story, where we'll just get parts of it for our military so that Russia and China can't do it. But it very much looks like the North American technate map. And it just so happens to be at a time in history when men like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Sam Altman all have the ear of the president of the United States of America. And technology is expanding at a rate and doing things that we don't even control anymore and have no concept of where it's going to end. So this idea of a North American technate is no longer mythological or aspirational. We kind of see it playing out right in front of us.
Elon Musk's grandfather, called Haldeman, he was pushing something called the technate, a area that goes from Venezuela, Panama, and Mexico, up through the United States, through Canada, and Greenland.
Venezuela is on high alert this morning.
Targeting Venezuela.
Send U.S. troops into Mexico.
Moving troops into Mexico. Saying we want Canada to be the 51st state.
We've been dealing with Greenland, and we have to do it.
It's the technate unfolding, and these technates under a world government, which again would be appointed, not elected. That's why they're putting so many moronic politicians into power. They're trying to undermine public support for elected politicians.
Now, why is that important to our conversation today about Utah and the Mormon Church? Well, the reason it's important is simply this. The church has been in bed with the American intelligence agencies, but not only that, but they've been in bed with the military-industrial complex for over 70 years now. And they've been very much doing business with the gods of endless war while trying to represent the Prince of Peace. Okay? If this North American technate comes into existence, Utah will be a major hub. So Silicon Slopes is obviously right there at the point of the mountain, down through Lehigh and all that kind of stuff. You've got the Bumble Hive out there that the NSA uses to spy on American citizens. You've got Dugway National Grounds. You've got all kinds of things. And Utah has committed itself to being a major part of the surveillance state and the intelligence community. So if this rolls itself out, I would expect to see, here's the irony of it, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, and it's very speculative. But the church has run the state of Utah for a very long time, and they're very used to being in the catbird seat. I think that what they're going to find is that the technocracy has very little sympathy or empathy for religion. And if they want Utah, the church may find itself not so powerful very, very quickly. Because this new form of government, the technocracy, doesn't care about your religious rights. They just want to optimize and maximize everything that they can. And in many of their philosophies, religion is at best neutral and at worst harmful. So the church, the fruits of the church hopping into bed with these organizations may be the church losing power in the only state that it's had power in since its inception.
Yeah. I think this is a topic that is very worthy of its own show.
Yeah, we almost need Chelsea here with us
yeah,
too. And what's really full circle for me is 3 years ago, we were on Epoch Times, American Thought Leaders Program, and you can find the link to that show, ringing the alarms on the technocratic authoritative governance that's rolling into Utah. And some people called that a conspiracy. And we saw the smart cities coming up. And this is all now with the emergence of AI, everything is kind of coming to a head. And here we are right in the middle of it all.
Utah is anything but a sleepy, irrelevant state.
Yeah, I think it's the next state that's on the it's the next target for this group of people who want to swing things in a certain direction, right?
Well, and think about this hypothetically. Let's say there's a natural disaster, an earthquake or something. Wouldn't that then just pave the way even more for something like this to step in and clean up whatever mess there might be from displacement or what have you?
Sure, potentially.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, on behalf of our listeners, viewers, thank you for your time, your research, your efforts. I find it invaluable. I think it matters. I think you bring up a lot of points that need to be discussed and people need to reflect upon. And honestly, I believe the church should be thinking about and discussing and having answers to. But clearly there's issues.
Yeah. And I just want a second really quickly.
Yeah, please.
My thing is, I say it in every show, the leaders of the church owe it to their members to have these conversations. The time for hiding in ivory towers is over. Church members deserve to know this part of history in addition to the good part, like in addition to the part of history that they want to share. And they deserve, we're grown-ups, we're not children. And we're at a critical hinge point in history, right? So I know that the Strengthening the Church Members Committee is watching these shows. I know, I've been told, okay? I would encourage them to take it to the leaders of the church. And I would encourage the leaders of the church to get out of their ivory towers and come engage with us. Like, we love them. I love them. I was excommunicated by them. I love them. I want to have these conversations with them so that we can understand where they're coming from and why they're doing what they've done or why they've done what they've done and why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that they'll find that people are very forgiving and people are very interested in why things are happening in the way that they are.
Yeah. Well, God bless you. I appreciate you. Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
I mean, I have a lot of things to say because there's just so much here that we cover. We cover history, we cover some elements of SRA, we cover the technocracy, which I think we can do a whole show on. But just going back to the origin and stuff we started with, you see things on TV glorifying, the pioneers and the early days. Especially now, you see Mormon culture all over TV. But we watched that one show on Netflix, American Primeval, where it talks about Brigham Young riling up, the Mormons and establishing the kingdom. And you think, oh, is this true? Is this not true? Because, there's so much we don't know. We probably know maybe 20% of what actually happened.
Sure, if that, yeah.
And you think, okay, well, this is too fantastical to be true. But when you start unpeeling the layers of the real history, you realize whatever the truth is, and I think we're just skimming over, putting pieces together, it's way more wild than any screenwriter can put together for entertainment purposes. Yeah. So it's thank you for putting this together. I hope this gives people not only just things to think about, but opportunities to research each one of these, because each one of these timelines and decades could have its own series, let alone show. So thank you for piecing it together and weaving it together in a way that's digestible. So
you're welcome. Thanks for giving me a space to do it.
Thank you.
To our members, our listeners, our viewers, our supporters, put your faith in Christ. That's it. God lives. Jesus is the Christ, and you have personal revelation for a reason, and He expects us to use it. So thank you for all you guys do. I know it's hard for a lot of us. It's hard. These are hard conversations that maybe we don't want to hear. I don't like hearing it. I don't like covering it. But I think we owe it to our children to protect them and to have these conversations. So thank you guys for all you do, and God bless you.
Most filters only strip out contaminants, and they do it poorly. Sentry removes toxins at a deeper level and adds back minerals. 75% of customers feel the difference in just 2 weeks. Install your Sentry Wellness System in just 30 minutes and enjoy water that fuels your life. Learn more at sentryh2o.com.